Okay. Be right back. Ah. And I'm back. And I'm squint. That's better. Hello. Okay. Recording. Charles Amos? Anyone?
Party. Just 2 months in, and Keir Starmer has taken winter fuel payments of 10 million pensioners, showered billions of taxpayers' money, the Conservatives say, on his union paymasters, and is now engulfed in a cronyism scandal after parachuting donors and supporters into top taxpayer-funded jobs. The soft-touch Labour Chancellor is squandering money whilst fabricating a financial black hole in an attempt to con the public into accepting tax rises and literally leaving pensioners out in the cold. What do you make of that?
I think it's a great shame that the party of sound public finances is attacking the Labour Party for making the tough decisions over winter fuel allowance and other things.
This idea that somehow fiscal responsibility means not spending any money. Yeah, you know what would have been really fiscally responsible? Letting a bunch of old age pensioners die because they don't have enough money to heat their home. Because there'll be plenty of people who are just over the line for pension credit who will now not be getting the winter fuel payment, and that will lead them to not have a warm enough house in the winter. And that's what happens to old people when they don't have a warm enough house in the winter. It's as simple as that. That is not sound finances. That is not a sound financial decision to take that away. Sound financial management is when you spend money on the right things. Spending no money is how you end up with no assets.
It's not the right thing to do. It's very, very clearly attempting to score cheap points over the Labour Party, as opposed to putting forward the national interest, which is what a proper party would be doing. They should be backing the measures that Labour is making that are tough.
You believe the tough measures, as you call them, and getting rid of winter fuel allowance for 10 million pensioners is the right thing to do?
Absolutely. It's
Why?
the best thing they have done, because people do not need this money.
Large. I don't think that you need any help, and if you think that you do, you're lying. This is what their justification was for enacting the giant slashing of the welfare budget throughout the entirety of the Osborne austerity period, again, which led to 330,000 excess deaths. That is a gigantic stain on their record, by all means. And that same vein is being used by this person here from Conservative Home and the Mises Institute as a justification as to why we should take money away from pensioners. And if they are told that what they are doing is harmful, what's their response? Is it, oh, well, maybe I should re-look at what I have intuited my position as? No, it's, nuh-uh. You're wrong. You're lying. You can't possibly need this money. I don't believe you. Yet, what do we have as a result of last time a government tried to do this when in government by slashing welfare payments? 330,000 excess deaths.
If you look at the bottom quintile of pensioners, they spend 17.8% of their income on hotels, restaurants, cigarettes and alcohol. That's the equivalent of £2,100 for them. If you take...
Hi, Scrappy. Some Charles Amos? Seriously, this man needs dealt with. TOS. And Helena, covering. Bravo. Bravo. Shall we?
Take away the £200 winter fuel allowance from those people, they would only have to cut that expenditure, which could only be described as leisure expenditure, by 10%. Now, when one of your texters talks about heating...
And again, this is just like what they say with young people. Oh, they can't afford a house because they're spending their money on Netflix and they're not...
Same with me. Honestly, I thought this was a comedian doing a bit. No, this man actually exists. Holy fuck. Seriously. In this day and age? Seriously?
Not booking a packed lunch and they get avocado toast. Just the same as saying all of these pensioners, the bottom quintile, actually...
Screw avocado. Blech. Don't like it. One bit. Each to their own. Scrubby, do you like avocado? No slight to you, of course. Eat what you want and like I do. Lots of protein and a fuck to the dairy. Because
They're not in need of help
Dairy-
whatsoever at all.
because dairy is good, especially for someone whose bones are wearing away. I need the dairy.
They're too busy spending their money on eating at restaurants and enjoying their lives. I can't claim the veracity of these statements. And again, this is 20% and then a percentage of those people, as if all of the bottom quintile, all of them are being reckless with their finances, and therefore some of them fall through the cracks. Well, that's good enough as a reason to punish those who aren't being fiscally prudent in their own time.
And for those tiny minority
There are a number of people who find that an outrageous comment.
Fine.
Michael.
Well, it's an out of touch ivory tower response, if you don't mind me saying so, Charles. I mean, just to say, pensioners have got lots of leisure interests. They go on holiday, they drink alcohol, and so on. That may be true in some cases, but there are many pensioners who are so poor they can only heat one room. They frequently really live in fear of going into debt because, of course, if you're retired, the prospects of you paying off debt is much harder, and so there really is a genuine hardship. And we're not just talking about the group of people for whom the winter fuel payments will carry on. So I think
Advocate and lemonade and cream. My granny liked it. It's disgusting. Whoa. She liked it. Okay, Granny. I didn't. What is that? Give me a minute. Other than a former Rangers manager. He's Dutch. Maybe Africa's Dutch. Advocate is a traditional Dutch alcoholic beverage made from eggs, sugar, and brandy. The rich and creamy drink has a smooth custard-like consistency. Ugh. Sounds vile. The typical content, generally between 14 and 20% ABV. Oh God. Look at it. Looks vile. Seriously, good. And how could you drink it? Whoa. Ugh. Back to Charles.
a little bit more sympathy on your
But
part.
I'm talking about the bottom 20% of pensioners, and it should be remembered that the very, very, very poorest pensioners, the 1 million pensioners who still receive pension credit, will carry on receiving the winter fuel allowance.
essentially
When
you're
people
saying,
talk-
but
No, they won't. Some of them won't. That's hilarious. That's dead scribbly.
Charles, you're saying to pensioners who enjoy a fag or a drink, give that up if you can't afford things. I mean, are you honestly saying?
We have the worst state pension in Europe. Plenty of people who are not going to get pension credit, who are just above the threshold for it, who will need the winter fuel payment to be able to have a properly heated home, who will now not get it. And also those who don't claim pension credit even though they qualify for it, who now won't begin the winter fuel payment. So they're also going to be on the sharp end of this too. And then plenty of other people who just fall through the cracks regardless. I will say it is pretty hypocritical from a bunch of right-wing commentators getting outraged, legitimately, I think correctly outraged at this idea that all pensioners have it good and
No, they
anybody
don't.
who's above the threshold for pension credit doesn't actually need this winter fuel payment. This is an excellent welfare cut from the government. That opinion, getting outraged at
No,
that
it
opinion
isn't.
correctly in my mind. Yet do you think he would get just as outraged with PIT or with Motability or with job seekers allowance or any other kind of welfare payment? It's weird how it's always a different rule for, I don't know, the Conservative Party's voting base, when of course I believe in having good welfare payments to old and young people, because that would be an ethical and also would be a consistent position.
Saying people should stop smoking.
People like me. You're disabled. You can't work. You need the money to maintain a decent household. We do our best. Super hubby is called that for a reason. He is a miracle worker. Really. Praise be. Christ knows what state I'd be in without him. Woo.
I think everybody should. So they should give up any luxury they have. Anything,
No, I'm
a cigarette
not saying
that gets them through the day.
I'm saying that they should reduce their leisure expenditure by 10%. In fact, less than 10%. Reduce it down from £2,100.
Ooh. We need to send a link to this best of from Helena to Oxford. I wonder what college it would be. If I knew what he studied, I'd be able to figure out what college he'd be going to. The PP might be new college. Give me a second. Colleges of Oxford. Alright. Balliol. New college. Magdalen? Linacre? No. Linacre Sites. Hell, I think it might be New College. New College. Undergrads. Fine. Undergrad. Bloody hell. Ancient, modern history. Could be Brooks. Arabic. Biochem. Biology. Biomed. Chemistry. Classics. No surprise. Classics with Asian and Middle Eastern. Computer science. Computer science and philosophy. Curious. Economics and management. Dear God. Engineering. English. English and modern languages. European and Middle Eastern languages. Fine art. History. History and economics. History and modern languages. History and politics. Law. Law with European law. Mathematics. Mathematics. Philosophy. Okay, let's check Brooks. Brooks, Oxford courses. What are we looking at now? All levels. Undergrad. Philosophy, politics, and economics. Philosophy, PPE, economics, politics, international relations. Might actually be Brooks. I'm sure we'll find out. So it's either you or Brooks. Thanks for saying Brooks, by the way.
To £1,900. That's not much to ask. People are not entitled to force other people to give up the fruits of their labour so they can go on holiday or they can have a pint of beer down the pub. People should stand on their own 2 feet, and this is part of making people...
They can't. That's the whole point. The only reason my mum manages to go on holidays is because my kinda stepdad, her boyfriend, essentially. He's got a lot more money. He earned quite well when he was working, and he mostly pays for their little getaways. And most of the time, it's either here in the UK or Ireland. Very rarely do they get abroad. And didn't he slate them for having a weekend getaway in Donegal, you twat. And even then, they're staying at my stepdad's cousin's, because their house is big. Is the echo gone? Fantastic. Hi, Jim. Welcome in. Charles Amos. Let's debunk this twat. Hey.
People stand on their own 2 feet. Ideally, we shouldn't even have a state pension system. Everybody should have a private pension.
Sorry, you shouldn't have a...
What? We should get rid of the state pension and have only private pensions? The reactions here from his co-panelists say it all, really. No.
Oh, sorry about that. Go back. Right, still paused. I can't get a private pension. You Egypt. I will solely be reliant on the state pension. And 22-ish years. 23 as it stands this day. So I'll be 60, 68. And that'll be a state pension. That's all I'll get. Super hubby will get his Royal Mail one plus a state pension. And that's all we'll have. I doubt we'll get foreign holidays. Maybe ones around the UK. Mostly Scotland, obviously. Beautiful country. Need to see all of it. Maybe Ireland as well. I've got friends I need to visit. I ain't going to get to anywhere unless I win the lottery. Have you? Did you enjoy yourself? I hope you did, because it's brilliant up here. I approve. Come to Scotland. Again.
Only should pensioners not have access to the winter fuel allowance, apart from a tiny minority who qualify for pension credit, who also actually claim pension credit as well. On top of that, no state pension whatsoever.
Ooh, fun fact. When we get to pension age, or when I get to pension age, the tax credit will put me over, and I won't get the winter fuel if it exists in 23 years. It might, you never know, but doubtful. But screw me, because I am scum. apparently.
If you've lived your life in a job where you don't get a good enough private pension, tough shit. We already have the worst state pension in Europe. And his position is not, well, how about we make life a little bit better for the elderly by making sure our state pension is a little bit more lucrative? No, get rid of the state pension. Libertarians, right? Am I right, chat?
The state pension system?
No, not
really?
at all. People should support themselves on their own 2p with a private pension.
What about disabled people? Should they just fend
Oops.
for themselves?
Ideally, charities should support those people, or they...
Literally.
I lost my shit in chat. I went all caps twice. Fecking C word. I try not to shout, not nice, yelling at this, but my God, I lost my rag. Shouting and swearing at him. He is scum, not me. I want everyone to do better, to be well treated and well looked after. He doesn't. He just wants all of us to fuck off. Yeah. Okay, back to the twat.
It's like, what about the state protecting the disabled? No! And if people don't donate to charity, then the disabled people are SOL.
Are you saying, sorry, Charles, are you saying there shouldn't be state benefits for people who are disabled?
Yes.
Why? What is your possible logic for that? People who can't quite literally stand on their own 2 feet, people who, through no fault of their own, are...
My God. A top TV person supporting people like me. Wow. How far gone is Amos? Seriously.
in a situation where they need a handout from the state to survive.
People are entitled to their private property, to the fruits of their labour, and it is wrong for the state to forcefully...
Is this man a Rothbardian? Is that what I'm coming up against? We talk about a Rothbardian here. This property rights fundamentalism that he's got going on here. Again, equating the idea that people's remuneration financially is somehow a one...
I'm a little upset that Helena's fuzzed out the chat. Seeing my screed might have been fun. Seriously, I was losing my mind.
One-to-one representation of how much work they've done or their usefulness to society. Money is not the resources that are created. It is not a measure of someone's worth to society. All it is a measure of how we distribute goods and services in society. It's a measure of where resources get distributed. And the market fundamentalist logic over this is just, well, however you provide to the market should be how you get judged in terms of what resources you have access to. Us, here on the left, who think that the state should be active in shaping the distribution, say, no, maybe this needs some redistribution to make it a little bit more even, because the market can sometimes overvalue people's contributions in terms of what they really are.
Screw the market. Nah.
To society, when the broader utility of sharing this out more equitably leads to better outcomes and happiness for everybody.
Just as we do not accept that charities such as Oxfam can thieve from individuals to support starving Africans in that continent, neither should...
They're not thieving. People are donating to them. They're not inspecting people's wallets. What the fuck? People can donate to charity if they want. Like me, RNLI, and versus arthritis, because that directly affects me. That one, not RNLI. I get seasick.
we accept that private individuals should have their private property stolen from them by the state to support people such as disabled people.
I want to take a call from Ruth in Bedford, who I think has perhaps taken exception to what Charles has said. Ruth, you're very welcome to the programme. You're on with me and with Michael Crick and Charles Amos as well. What would you like to say today?
I'd like to say about the winter allowance that not all pensioners are rolling around the countryside and on planes going abroad and spending money in hotels. I have just the basic pension. I have to pay a bit of my rent because my rent isn't covered fully by the housing benefit, and I am desperate. I've had
Geode, as in like a geode. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Educate me. Right, back to the twat. Oops. Sorry? Go, not her.
had a 23% rise in my rent this year. How this man can sit there and say that most of the pensioners don't need this, I can't understand it, because there's 10 million of us who aren't.
It's because he's a sociopath. These hard right libertarian types, they're just sociopaths. Nobody grows up with the, oh, this is mine, oh, do I have to share rhetoric, unless they're a sociopath. How you have to view how we create society just fundamentally cannot conceive of collective desire to look after the vulnerable.
There's an awful lot of people in my situation who have nothing, and we're living on £228 a week. And I challenge him to do that, especially when you've got to pay rent out of it as well.
And it's important to understand that obviously young people get hit really hard by private rent, but those who aren't working are some of the people who are the hardest by the fact that the rental market in this country is screwed up to high heaven. So people who are on job seekers as welfare, people who are on disability as welfare, or people who are on the state pension as welfare, these people have it really tough when you have to start paying the exorbitant rents. Those who fell through the cracks during the housing boom.
My rent is essentially a council rent. We were one of the last to get a council house from Glasgow. Praise be. I'm lucky. Were we? 181 and 39 a month. My niece hates me. She's in a bedsit and she's paying 380. She's on the same benefit as me, but that's a huge chunk of our benefit to pay that rent.
During the 90s and the 80s, who never became homeowners and are renting for their whole adult life. When they get into retirement and they're still renting, the state pension is garbage. Whereas there are people out there not paying anything at all on mortgages they've paid off. There's a giant gap that you get in terms of people who probably don't even qualify for pension credit, but who how their differences in expenditure is vast because of one paying rent and the other not.
You've got the increase in the in all the bills and everything. Yeah. Everything's just going up. And
oh, don't worry, Jim. Yes, it does. Sealed. Excuse me? I would take a sledgehammer. I would take a sledgehammer to that ratchet.
You can't get pension credit if you get the full pension.
Ooh. Emo. Oh my God. I'm a genius. Right. I need to find an artist. Ooh. I might do that. Thanks, Gribby.
Charles, what would you say to her?
£228 a week.
I would say this. If you look at the bottom 20% of pensioners, they spend 17.8%.
I don't think she cares about statistics. I think she cares about how she lives.
Does the caller live in a flat, or does she live in a room in somebody's house?
It makes absolutely no difference where I
It does,
live.
because if you live in a flat...
Evidence. Amos. Evidence.
You could live in a room in somebody else's house, as I do.
Thank you. At my age.
What the hell? His argument is, well, I understand that where you're living might not be particularly optimal given your financial circumstances. Have you considered moving in with a mate or living in an HMO as an old person rather than having literally any autonomy whatsoever? It's clear that you're living above your means by having a flat to yourself. Unreal.
Why should
not?
other
I'll tell
people
you why not,
subsidise you
because-
to live in a flat through
listen to
their
me,
labour?
will
Hold on,
you?
let her speak. Let her speak.
You listen to me. When you've had a family and lived independently for all those years, why should I go and live in a one room with somebody's family just because I haven't got enough to pay my electric bill?
Because it's not
Why
right.
should I?
I'll tell you why. Because it's not right that other people should be forced to give up their income to subsidise you to live in a flat.
They're not. They're paying tax. And how the government spent that and any other revenue streams they bring in, it's the government that decides, not the people receiving it. Bloody hell. God.
Or an apartment where you don't have to live with other people. It's all very well...
Excuse me, just wait a minute, wait there. Do you have a grandmother?
I do have a grandmother.
Would you put her in a house with somebody else that you don't know, that nobody knows in your family? Would you put her in a one room to share? Tell me that. Would you do that?
I wouldn't want to, and
No.
my dad wouldn't allow it to happen because he's wealthy
Well, yes,
enough.
okay.
Jesus, this man is like a parody. He is a parody of every single revolting conservative person that you've ever met in your life. Just going like, oh, well, I don't have to care because my dad's rich. How dare we give pensioners a very small amount of winter fuel payment so that they can ensure that they...
You okay, Helena? I was worried for her. I don't blame her, actually. This man is a ghoul.
at least keep some of their independence before they die. But no, I'm alright, Jack. My dad's rich. That's it. Born into wealth and privilege, cannot bother empathising with anybody else. Sorry you're in a shit situation, but I'm rich and you're poor, so jog on. Why don't poor people just buy more money? Just don't be poor. Have you tried not being poor? This is his gambit as well. This wasn't information offered up by the caller. He voluntarily went to the caller, well, are you living in a flat or are you living in a house share? Like a student?
Okay, because your dad's got money, right?
Yes, because my dad has money. If he has money, he can do more stuff than you, who doesn't have as much money.
Exactly. So why should I be punished? Why
You're
should
not being
I be
punished. If you don't have money, you can't have as much stuff. It's as simple as that. And you shouldn't expect
Yes, it
other
is,
people to
yes.
pay
But
taxes.
I've worked.
to support.
And this is why I hate market logic. It's literally just, you don't deserve this because you've not interacted with the market in such a way as to have enough of the currency to be able to justify subsistence level of existence. I just despise this kind of stuff. But again, you have to be a sociopath to be a Rothbardian. Like, for people who don't know, Murray Rothbard is like the ultimate ANCAP.
I have worked all my life. I've brought out 5 children, mostly on my own, and they all work. Now, this isn't right that I...
Yeah, but did you work as a
Pardon
management
me?
consultant for KPMG? I think not. Checkmate. You must have done a menial job for the plebs. Therefore, dignity in old age should be beyond you. This is genuinely how these people think.
I am not being able to pay my electric bill. It's just not right that I should be put into a
Yeah.
room sharing in a house with other people at my age. It isn't fair.
Well, I would disagree entirely. Maybe if you didn't have 5 children and you had fewer children, you could have saved a bit more and you wouldn't, wouldn't end up in that situation.
My 5 children are all looking after everybody else by paying tax because they work hard. One is actually a train driver. So, you know, I'd just give up.
Charles, I think a lot of people will find what you're saying quite cruel.
Fine.
Have to be a sociopath. People, like, outraged at you. Everybody
Yes.
around you going, you sound like a bit of a dickhead, mate. And
Behold, everyone. Sociopath. Don't listen. The man is mad.
And your response is, well, if you say I'm a dickhead, I guess I must be a dickhead then. The rest of us, we have this filter system where we'll say, well, maybe I won't say that. Might sound a bit nasty. And yet the libertarian brain is so sociopathic, you just cannot possibly engage in any amount of empathy. You are an empathy vacuum to be these Rothbardian libertarians.
Do you not have compassion for people like Ruth?
These people who are moaning about the winter fuel allowance being cut do not need the money. They can cut their leisure expenditure by 10%. And when they pretend that there's a choice between heating and eating, they're making things up.
Okay, just a final word now to Charles.
My final word to Charles is, I hope when he gets to my age, he is not sitting in a one-bedroom room.
Okay, well listen.
I hope he ends up being Ayn Rand and claiming state benefits despite spending her life railing against them, and he ends up being a massive, gigantic hypocrite. Honestly, I hope that he just ends up changing his mind and becoming a better person. Remember that guy from Conservative Home who we watched on stream who was arguing that it was good to take away the winter fuel payment from all but those on pension credit, and in the process argued that we should get rid of the state pension entirely, and that on top of that we should force old ladies who can't afford to heat their flat to move into HMOs. That guy, that sociopath that we watched, Jim from Friday Night Dinner, he's back. He's been back on Talk TV talking to James Whale, friend of the show, and apparently things get a little bit heated. Spoiler alert, it's James Whale, so it should be very funny. Let's have a watch.
A columnist for I nearly said a communist. A columnist for Conservative Home. Charles, welcome to the programme. I don't think you're going to be a really popular person because apparently you believe Labour scrapping the winter fuel allowance has been the best thing they've ever done.
Absolutely. I don't think that people need the winter fuel allowance. The vast majority of pensioners can afford to do without it. If you look at the bottom quintile of household expenditure of individuals aged from 65 and over, they spend 17.8% of their income on hotels.
I'll say again. Evidence.
Hotels, restaurants, recreation, cigarettes and alcohol. That equates to £2,100.
It's fine.
Without the winter fuel allowance, all they would have to do is cut their leisure expenditure by 10%.
But that's not everybody. That's not everybody amongst that quintile. There are plenty of people who don't get pension credit who do need the winter fuel allowance. And who don't spend all their money on hotels and booze or whatever. Is this a real person, 27 Club? Yes. This is a real person with real opinions. He got kicked out of the KCL Conservative Club for being too right-wing. And this guy, he loves Labour policy. This guy has been a cheerleader for the Labour Party now. Just shows you what Keir Starmer is like.
Why should they? Why should I? I'm a pensioner, right? I'm in my mid-70s. And I am, I'm probably not now.
Apparently, he doesn't consider them people or worthwhile. What's a dick?
Eligible for the winter fuel allowance, but I've paid enormous amounts of tax my entire life, been very lucky. Why shouldn't I benefit from a bit of this when I get old? I can't earn.
Well, you're benefiting from your taxes, you're benefiting from my taxes, and you get paid by current taxpayers, and that's always been the case.
Earn as much now as I could when I was your age, and we've supported this country. We've done quite a lot for this country, and now the sodding members of Parliament, both sides, giving it all away. They give it away in overseas.
Yes, he does, Jim. He does, because he is a tool.
He's aid, 10 billion a year.
The unions,
or something.
£9 billion for the unions.
Yeah.
Taken off.
No, they didn't go to the unions. They went and pay awards to people who actually do keep the country functioning. I'm sure James Whale really did pay his way into the country by being a talk radio host. Yeah, the most important of sectors of the economy, talk radio hosts are absolutely invaluable to the running of the economy, being a talk radio host, as opposed to driving the trains that keep the economy going or keeping people healthy, like doctors and nurses. It wasn't the unions that got their money. It was working people who do real jobs, who aren't, may I reiterate, talk radio hosts.
For the pensioners, but the other thing, in the office, I had a look at the figures, and there's 3/3 in the year where they measure how many deaths there are, and there's 30,000 excess deaths in the winter period because of the cold and respiratory. So obviously they haven't got excess money because they're dying. So it's not like they're spending excess. They are 30,000, and there'll be more now, won't there?
Let Charles answer this.
So it sort of proves your point wrong.
Charles,
I'm very sympathetic to the idea. In fact, I agree with the idea that if you pay £1 into the state, you should get that pound out. But the average boom...
No, that's not how that works at all. People don't pay in based upon what they get out. They pay in based upon their ability to pay. Even under a household budget model, that's not how that works. Millionaires who pay in more than people on minimum wage are not supposed to get more out of the state than those who are poor. It's a way of income redistribution.
Those born from 19...
I find that insulting, by the way.
Okay, well, the average person...
It's because he is one.
The average person...
Gammon. We prefer gammon.
I find that insulting.
The average person born between 1946 and 1961...
They've taken it all.
...have taken out £1.20 from the welfare state for every £1 they've paid in. So when you make the argument that I've paid in all my life, so I'm entitled...
They're entitled to it. That's the way the government set it up. Okay? If you're unhappy, get rid of the government of the day. Vote for who you want. Personally, I wouldn't want you to have the vote because you're a ghoul.
To get all of the money out and the winter fuel allowance, it doesn't go through. Because
what about the 30,000 excess deaths, though? Let's talk about the actual proper poor people.
Okay, but it's important to distinguish two arguments.
Yeah, I agree.
One is, I've paid in all my life, so I should get it out, and that doesn't apply to the winter fuel allowance because most people hadn't paid enough in to warrant it. Now, you're talking about need.
Just, again, if we just stop this I've paid in so I deserve things. No, we spend money based on utility. We make government policy based upon utility. None of this I paid £1 and I take £1 out. Nonsense. That's not how macroeconomics works. It's not how statecraft is supposed to work. It's not how policy is supposed to work. We write policy, we engage in policy because it has the best utilitarian outcomes. Older people need to have warmer homes because they are frailer than younger people. Therefore, we pay them winter fuel allowance. That is the utility. That's why we do the policy. Not because they've paid in or they've already taken too much out by getting a good welfare state from 45 to 1990 or whatever. Nonsense. Abject nonsense. That's not how it's supposed to work.
As I've said, the bottom quintile of pensioners spend 17.8% of their income on alcohol, cigarettes, hotels, recreation,
and why shouldn't they?
Restaurants. Well, I've just told you why they shouldn't. Because they.
Why, when you get old, should you not have a nice life?
Because they've taken more out of the welfare state than they've paid in.
You've taken too much.
Not our fault, Charles.
Well, it is because people such as yourself.
And again, I'm just going to point out the hypocrisy here, is that these people here saying, oh, well, I've paid in and I've got loads out of the welfare state, but we need to take welfare payments away from the scroungers and the disabled. That was good austerity, but it's bad austerity when you take it away from me personally, because these people are devoid of compassion. These people are devoid of thinking outside of their own material interests and think about, other people, which basically at this point seems to be the divider between the left and right, just caring about other people or not. There's a really funny HuffPost article from 10 years ago at this point. It was just titled, I don't know how to convince you that you should care about other people. It does a lot of my thinking. It really does a lot of my thinking even to this day. Even if you were to accept his framing, and you shouldn't, if you don't provide benefits, then it ends up costing the state much more in terms of social problems, be that healthcare or prisons. Exactly! If you don't spend money alleviating societal ills through public state policy, you then paying more down the line are all of the negative externalities, such as having to pay for the healthcare of cold pensioners. Very good point.
Or others have voted.
Pay tax.
You pay tax, but you haven't paid in enough tax to warrant getting the winter fuel allowance.
Not my fault.
Oi, including me. I only worked 6 years before I had to stop. Right? So, with that one statement, you've taken me out. Blech. I will fight people like you until I die.
People like you,
I can't speak about you in particular, because I don't know
I
how
can.
wealthy you are
You can ask
and whether
me.
or not you've paid in on net basis.
I'm not particularly wealthy.
But literally, they're trying to argue from the standpoint that you should get as much as you pay in out. The end point of this rhetoric is that millionaires and billionaires and multi-billionaires should get more out of the state than poor people, which is insane logic. Absolutely catastrophically insane.
I don't think she picks one of mine. I can't remember if I posted anything about him this time. I did the last time. I was shouting a lot.
Insane logic.
But I've earned a reasonable amount of money for the last 50 years.
Well, if you're in the top 25% of earners, then you probably are a net contributor and you probably do deserve the winter fuel allowance.
Thank you.
But
Doesn't work like that. Absolute idiots. Doesn't work like that. Oops. Sorry about that. Go.
He's out here saying that rich people deserve the winter fuel payment and poor people don't. He's unironically making the argument that poor people deserve it less than rich people.
Mine. My
He's
Discord.
even more insane than I thought. He could be a Chris Morris character, absolutely. Really kind of showing a mirror up to conservatives what they really sound like to everybody else outside of their tiny little bubble. So we should means test it then, but better? No, we should provide it to everybody and then have a tax taper at the top to recoup that money back from rich people, because as the lowest in administrative costs and means that nobody falls through the cracks. It's the easiest and simplest way to do it.
I want
poorer
it back.
pensioners
It's the middle ones that
do
shouldn't
not.
get it. The middle ones.
What?
The very poor ones should, and him that's
No, but
paid
why
enough.
should the very poor one get it?
Because
They
they're
don't-
dying.
they
30,000 of them
don't
died.
need the money.
Yeah, but
The
you don't want them to
30,000
die, do you?
The 30,000 individuals there that have died, I suspect have died
hang on.
because they've decided not to put up the heating when they could afford to put up the heating.
Charles, you are...
But they want
We've now moved on to those old people killed themselves by being stupid. That's how far we've gone here. We're through the looking glass here, people.
to save money
You
instead.
really shouldn't have anything to do with the Conservative home. You're never going to get Conservatives elected
I mean, this is just conservatism. This is what conservatives believe.
again if you go down this road.
I don't think they will
But
anyway.
why on earth would you feel like that when there are people who are living, I don't know how much you earn, but there are people scraping by and trying to live on £800 or £900 a month and less. Now, it's not a lot of money to be able to live on. If you don't have a private pension, and I don't, well, actually, I think I do. I think it pays something like 25 quid a week. I didn't pay into it after I was about 35. But the fact is that these people have struggled through their lives. Most of them have worked. Those people who didn't work, who are chronically disabled, that's a completely different issue. There are people who worked, scrimped and saved. They get to the end of their lives, they go on the state pension, and it is almost impossible.
Miserable existence,
to
and they've worked all their lives.
Succeed.
That's not true. The state pension gives individuals about £11,000 a year.
Give me a second. I know he's talking. Bollocks. What's my calculator? There it's there. That's how times. Ooh. That is actually correct. 11,468 and 60 pence. Which is shite. Between us, this includes housing benefit, or rent, and council tax benefit. We're on just under 25. But we will take a hit. We'll go down to about 20 without Super Hubby's Royal Mail. But the state pension will be equalised, so we won't go up. We'll probably both drop.
Now,
You live on 11,000?
Exactly. Could you live on £1,000 a year? It's not a good state pension. It isn't a good state pension. Especially, again, if you're a renter, I made this point yesterday, I'll make it again today. If you're a renter, rather than somebody who's managed to get on the property ladder because you were unluckier or you were poorer, you need more money than the state pension provides. How could anybody live on £11,000 a year unless they have literally zero housing costs?
Could I live on £11,000 a year? Yes, I could live on £11,000.
Where do you live? In Thailand or something?
I live in Begbroke, and I pay £550 a month for my room and my bills included. And
You
my
don't
food
have
bill,
450
my
left, then?
food bill
Yeah.
would come to about £1,500. I could live on £11,000.
It wouldn't leave
a
you
year.
with much,
It
would it?
wouldn't be nice.
You spend over £1,000 on food a month. We're lucky if we get up to 200 a month. Food prices are mad. So you're getting a decent amount of food into your household, if we can call it that. We can't afford that.
I'm not pretending to
But
be
why
nice.
shouldn't they have a decent, be warm and have just a decent,
Old
slightly
age.
nice old
At
age?
the moment, they can. As I've said, the bottom quintile of pensioners spend 17.8% of their income on hotels, restaurants, alcohol, cigarettes,
Good.
and recreation.
Drink maybe, and we get up to pension age. We don't go on holiday. Neither of us have a valid passport. So, Scotland only, or UK only. And we are not getting loads of food into the household. So, that's going to drop when we get to pension age. You absolute twat.
He's going to go on the shared house thing again, isn't he? Yeah, he's going to say, just get the old people out of their flats, get rid of their independence and all their dignity. Go live in an HMO with some students if he can't afford the bills.
That's fine, but they can't claim when the winter fuel allowance is cut that somehow
The
they
reason
need
every-
it.
the
Because they
reason-
That's a
can
good
cut
point,
back
yeah.
their
Those-
expenditure
those sort
on
of
these
people-
unnecessary items.
They do need it. The pension is crap. Oh. Oops. Excuse me.
I don't believe the sort of people you describe actually worry about it at all. I think the people who you are talking about, those people who are just about managing hand to fist or whatever,
Hand to mouth.
yeah, that's a better
Hand
word.
in fist.
They are the people who are in need. They are the people who, in many cases, are too embarrassed to say that they don't have enough money. And okay, they can go, and if they're clever enough, but you have to be clever, go and they can apply for all other kind of benefits. But it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not guaranteed. So what the government who passed this, I can't remember who did pass the winter fuel benefits.
Tony Blair, wasn't it? Tony Blair.
1997.
Yeah. No, and and the point that Tony Blair made, he didn't do many good things, but one thing he did is he said, "Well, give it to every pension, everybody who draws a pension." And
Depends what lens you're looking through. James, thank you. Don't get me wrong. Don't like Blair at all. Still can't believe I voted Labour. 97. Numpty Katie.
that way we won't have to spend so much money on administration, and people who have, still are paying tax, then they'll be paying tax anyway.
I can't believe I'm agreeing with James Whale. This is how mad Charles Amos is as an individual. He is making me agree with James Whale. I hate him even more now for making me agree with James Whale, because he's right. And getting rid of the administrative costs is good. I think that if you think that the government's finances aren't good enough to justify it being universal anymore, introduce a tax taper. Say that again. But it'll be interesting to see if James...
Oops. I'm back.
Will has this same approach when it comes to the disabled or the poor or the unemployed.
It's important to mention that the very, very poorest individuals that you speak about, the 1 million pensioners who still receive pension credit, will continue to receive the winter fuel allowance. So if you're just concerned about need warranting people getting the winter fuel allowance, those who genuinely do need the winter fuel allowance will still receive it.
Would you take the bus passes off people?
I would take the bus passes off people. I can't stand seeing buses just full of pensioners all literally taking a free ride.
They're keeping warm on it, if anything.
I cannot think of anything else that would explain this guy's behaviour other than the fact that he's just a legitimate sociopath. I don't know that, of course. I'm not saying that there's going to be a diagnosis somewhere, but I'm just intuiting this from everything that I've seen. The only way that you could end up being like this person is if you're an actual sociopath. Anyone else got any better ideas? Unless, again, it's all an elaborate bit that's lasted for years and years and he does in his personal life as well. He literally just said he couldn't stand buses full of pensioners riding around for free. You know, the people who are so old they cannot drive, this is why we have subsidy for it. They are too old to be able to drive because it would be unsafe. So we subsidise the fact that they have no choice other than to get the bus.
I'm literally a communist.
Again, I think that we should make public transport free at the point of use as a way of encouraging the taking up of usage of public transport and get people out of their cars. But at the very least, we understand that the limited mobility of older people means that they are less likely to be able to have the functions to be able to drive. So we subsidise the ability for them to have transport elsewhere, given that their choices have been made for them already due to their lack of ability. That's the whole point of the free bus pass. But again, in the libertarian's mind, if you're too old to be able to drive, that's your fault. Stop being poor and old. May not have been your choice, but tough. In the libertarian's mind, everybody has the same spawn point. Everybody has the same circumstances. Everything is fair as long as you do it like a physicist would imagine it, as a frictionless sphere in a vacuum, rather than existing in a certain material reality. They could also beat the energy companies into an OAP tariff rather than giving them cash to blow on their overpriced heating bill. I mean, that is also true. We could just have more of a punitive policy to the energy companies, but I think we should be able to do both. Quite frankly.
They can keep warm on it. It gives them independence, keeps them alive, company gets them out and about.
It does do that, I agree.
What the flipping heck's wrong with you that you don't like old people?
Miserable.
I don't dislike old people.
Geode. Brilliant comment. Well said.
Obviously you do. How old are you? 30-something?
No, I'm 24.
You're 24.
I'm 24. Now, what I dislike...
I still can't get over that he's 24. I still cannot get over that somebody of that age looks like this. I can't get over it. The man looks...
He looks about my age. I'm 45, by the way. Dear God. Arnold, by the looks of it. And born sociopath. Bloody hell. This is what wealth and privilege does to the mind. Look at it. Just end me. These people are going to be the death of me a bit. Oh God. There we go. There we go. Cozy cakey. The comment you made, Helena.
Looks like he has quantum leapt here from 1970, from like a serial killer documentary.
20-frigging-4.
What I dislike, James,
you are disgusting.
To an OAP tariff rather than giving them cash to blow on their...
This one. Well said. I applaud you. You're great.
Overpriced heating bill. I mean, that is also true. We could just have more of a punitive policy to the energy companies, but I think we should be able to do both, quite frankly.
They can keep warm on it. It gives them independence, keeps them alive, company gets them out and about.
It does do that, I agree.
What the flipping heck's wrong with you that you don't like old people?
I don't dislike old
Yeah,
people.
obviously you do. How old are you? 30-something?
No, I'm 24.
You're 24.
I'm 24. Now, what I dislike...
I still can't get over that he's 24. I still cannot get over that somebody of that age looks like this. I can't get over it. The man looks like he has quantum leapt here from 1970.
Well, I'm glad you got to see it again. Yeah, a lot of them do. 4 of my uncles are tradesmen. You own their own businesses because they're all over 60 now. But they still chip in essentially. They do some work, finishing stuff, not the hard graft. That's what the young'uns are for.
Like a serial killer documentary.
20-frigging-4.
What I dislike, James,
You are disgusting.
is pensioners saying
disgusting.
they are entitled to benefits
welcome.
on the basis they've paid in all of their
You
lives when they've
are
not paid
amazing.
in on a net analysis.
And you're quite
the
straight-faced.
average pensioner has not paid into the
Are
welfare
you
state on a
hoping-
net analysis.
Are you hoping to be a
So they-
politician at some point in the future?
I did in the past, but not anymore.
Really? Good,
Yes.
because people like you are the least people we need to have in Parliament.
He's just a conservative. That's your political ideology, James. He just says what you people say about other disadvantaged groups, except he at least has the courtesy to be outspoken about it. At least he has the courtesy to say what he really thinks, rather than to pretend you care like people like you, James. This is just conservatism. This is conservatism at its base level. At the very least, when it comes to James Whale and his friend, no matter how into conservative politics they are, no matter how far they get into conservative politics, they still fundamentally cling on, at least somewhat, to the idea of the social contract. They still somehow believe that the social contract has some good. You are an old person, therefore we should mitigate some of the worst parts about being old through the welfare state. They fundamentally believe that the social contract has some relevance. I wish they would apply that same logic to the rest of society, but it still shows that people like James Whale can be sold on implying the social contract elsewhere. People like Charles Amos, the social contract does not exist anymore. It's not relevant.
Tonight's drink of choice, unfortunately, Strongbow, dark fruits. Can't drink actual Strongbow. Acid reflux. Really quite badly. Same with Super Hubby. Funny, Jim. Oops.
It's not something he believes. He doesn't even take it into account when deciding his political opinions. And that is neoliberalism writ large, is the destruction of the social contract. And this just shows you basically why conservative politics and neoliberal politics has to die. It has to go away. It cannot be allowed back into power. It cannot be allowed back into public discourse because it has absolutely brain-broken people. Because this is where the logic of that will take you if you believe in it wholeheartedly. There are points where conservatives will kind of hit the barrier and say, no, that doesn't pass the vibe check anymore.
Personally, more ale, but they've went up. Cider's relatively cheaper in the scheme of things. Everyone has a cider story. Correct, oddly enough.
On what little I believe in the social contract that you have left. But if we continue along the line of the abandonment of the social contract, people like Charles Amos will be everywhere. And that's the problem. So chat, who remembers Charles Amos? So for people who don't know, Charles Amos is a commentator for Conservative Home. And we first watched him when he was having a debate on Talk TV with Michael Crick and one of the hosts at the time about the winter fuel allowance. And then a caller, like a regular old lady, phoned in and said that she couldn't afford her heating without the winter fuel allowance. And his genuine response was, you should downsize and move into an HMO with people that you don't know if you can't afford it. That was his genuine response to an old lady worried about paying for heating bills. We watched him again on Talk TV, this time with James Whale and his pet, let's call him, getting angry about the fact that old people get free bus passes. And I swear this is true. He used the genuine common phrase. I hate seeing old people on the bus free.
Where would you take the bus passes off people?
I would take the bus passes off people.
Oh,
I can't stand seeing buses just full of pensioners all literally
They're
taking
keeping
free
warm
rides.
on it, if anything.
This is the kind of person that we're dealing with here. And again, he writes for conservative homes, so it's not a shock. He's like a Rothbardian libertarian type and like an extra libertarian type. He's on GB News today, and in a shock to nobody, as a libertarian, he's defending some questionable positions. We're going to have a watch, and this, honestly, it feels like performance art. You're not ready, chat.
Well, Jim, here you are. Help Amos has never been hit hard enough to make him reevaluate anything. Well said. I applaud you.
You are not ready at all for what we're about to witness.
Individuals should be free to pursue their own good in their own way, and that includes the freedom to marry and have children with whoever they want.
Would you include siblings in that?
I would include siblings in that. If you look at the number of birth defects amongst individuals that are father and daughter or brother and sister, it's about 57%. And although you may go, well, that's absolutely terrible, I would note that those individuals...
Ooh, our legendary Greens comms person, Sugar Horse, the ghost of Hayek incarnate. Well, I said Sugar Horse. Where's that? I can tell who that is. Is that a Monty Python character? Quite possibly. Yeah, I do the same. Shield. I'm glad she's unblurred it for this one.
Wouldn't exist at all if it weren't for these marriages that created them, so they're made at all.
So not satisfied with attacking freezing pensioners and pensioners who get a free bus pass.
Ooh. 8 minutes.
Now defending incest.
Okay.
This is peak libertarian.
I'll get to that link. Scrippy. Thank you. Back to Charles.
Brain. It is peak libertarian brain, especially when you get to something like, well, I understand that 57% of people will end up with birth defects, but that's just what happens when people engage in free actions between the two of them with a negative externality that I don't care about. It is the distillation of libertarianism down to the absolute nub of its meaning, with the...
Jim, I love you. Bro is jealous of the Habsburg chin. That's hilarious. Well said.
It doesn't matter what happens to other people. If I want to do it, then it's a good thing. And also this idea that existing at all rather than not existing, but with a birth defect if you do exist. If you haven't existed because the choice hasn't been made, then you're not negatively affected, right? This subjunctive future that he's trying to imagine here as a philosophical point, it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense, right? I'd also like to point out how he looks like a maths teacher from the 70s. This man is 24. I swear this is true. When we watched him previously, he was asked by James Whale, how old are you? And he said, I'm 24.
How old are you? 30-something?
No, I'm 24.
You're 24?
I'm 24.
You couldn't make it up. And this man is a commentator for Conservative Home. The one set up by Tim Montgomery. He has to be a Chris Morris character. I swear down, this cannot be a real human being.
And we're talking here about mental retardation, hernias, cataracts, and cleft palates. These are bad things for these individuals to have, but they don't make their lives not worth living.
Not being born in the first place is not the same as having your life ended. What is this? What is this point that he's making here? I don't even know. Why am I engaging with it in good faith is clearly ridiculous. Like, I could understand how somebody who had different political views from me could come to the conclusion, well, the first cousin marriages don't actually have this high level of birth defect, so it should be allowed. Even if I personally find it icky and don't think it should be allowed, I can understand how somebody could iterate a different position to me on first cousin marriages, for example. They happen in other cultures, whatever, right? I can get the Iqbal Muhammad position on this one. But to come out here, you've been given a platform on GB News, one of the biggest news organisations in the country, and your point of view is absolutely fine if fathers have sex with their daughters and have children. What do I even add to this? How do I even add, like, transformative content? Like, the memes make themselves? It's like a 4chan post to come to life. Exactly, Ashhold. But I guess, to be fair, incest is a time-honoured tradition in the UK. I mean, just look at the royal family.
They're a burden on the NHS. And that's a burden
You're
for
quite
the
right
rest of us.
about that, but then so are homosexuals that contract HIV and cost the NHS about $500.
He's trying to compare gay people who contract HIV. They don't even contract at higher rates than straight people do nowadays anyway. This man is like permanently 80s brained if he thinks it's like the gay disease. And then trying to say that that's...
Jim. What did you mean? I'm about to get banned. Was you being naughty? If it was directed towards Amos, I applaud you.
Comparative to people who have deformed children from incest. My God. I've just noticed a teddy bear. What the hell is the teddy bear going on? What? How is this real? He wrote like a defense of incest on his Substack. He is real. I don't believe it. I genuinely don't believe it. I didn't think it could get more crazy than old people should freeze and also not get a free bus pass. And this is a man who's promoted by conservative, he's even promoted by the Koch brothers think tank called Young Voices to promote these people in the media. Like, I couldn't think of a worse way to discredit conservatism as an ideology than having this person be its figurehead. Not even a figurehead, just being somebody contributing to the discourse under the banner of conservatism.
Yet we don't ban gay sex, do we? So I don't think by the same reasoning you can argue that cousin marriage or indeed sibling marriage can be banned either.
Charles, I do think it's quite a strange moral argument to use, because you're essentially saying that it doesn't matter how you bring a child into the world. I mean, you could use that argument for some pretty horrendous practices that totalitarian regimes use. And isn't it true that societies for centuries and millennia, actually, have had very strong rules against incest for exactly the reason that it has a very high chance of producing children with catastrophic disadvantages and disabilities? So I do think it's quite a strange moral argument to make that actually, well, at least these children exist, when actually culture for millennia have banned this for good reason.
Well, disadvantages compared to what state? These individuals wouldn't have existed if they weren't the result of these sibling or cousin marriages.
The children who are born through rape would not exist if it wasn't for the rape. That doesn't make morally acceptable.
And that's because it violates individual rights. But bringing somebody into existence who wouldn't otherwise exist and still has a worthwhile life, and the vast majority of disabled people do, is not wronging that individual or doing anything bad at all. Individuals should be free to have children with almost whoever they...
Here we go. You Scribby. No, he's got a copy of Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State and Utopia stood up in the background. Is that book? Thank you. I can categorically state that he's not read it. Ask him about the tale of the slave from the book, as that will stump him for sure. Yeah, turn up for the books. That's mad. GB News being good? Huh? Help?
Want. That freedom is fundamental to upholding the moral realm. And when you talk about me putting forward a total.
And this is why people will say, well, do you not believe in freedom? Well, not absolute freedom. Again, what positive or negative freedom? Shouldn't people who are born have the freedom to not be born with birth defects that were completely and totally avoidable if we didn't allow people to commit incest? Exactly what kind of moral realm does this guy exist in?
Totalitarian position. I would say quite the opposite.
Oh, Jim, was it Kings? Thanks. I was wondering. Thank you for that.
It's you guys who want to restrict the freedom of individuals to reproduce that are sort of engaging with totalitarianism.
Well,
I, for one, don't want to go back to a world.
It's true, yeah, exactly. It's just, that's it. Preventing incest, that's just totalitarianism. And I'm just a stick in the mud, apparently, for thinking that that's a bad thing.
Say in 1920s America, where we have government controlling the reproduction of people and trying to forward the quality of the genetic stock, as, say, Madison Grant wanted to do and indeed had his way with in America in the 1920s.
It's not totalitarian to want to protect children from unnecessary...
Oh, you quite literally are. That's exactly what this is supposed to be doing.
I suppose you are if you're talking about children in the aggregate, but you're not helping children by banning cousin marriage. Because as I say again, these individuals wouldn't have existed if it weren't for the courage marriage.
You're helping
so you can't
future
say they're
children.
harmed.
Charles, do you agree with the age of consent?
Bloody hell. Mocker. According to many economists, the state is warranted in taxing individuals to provide public goods because a free market in these services, e.g. streetlights, would produce a suboptimal supply. This public goods argument is fatally flawed, for it proves far too much, such as the government should pay pretty girls to go into the street, for they too are public goods. Such a policy is totally unacceptable. Thank you, Mocker. That is good.
What's that?
I'm not willing to discuss that on GB News.
Please somebody tell me he's a parody. Like, you can't be this libertarian. You can't be, like, how do I even comment on this? We all knew it was coming, right? We all knew it was coming, chat, didn't we?
Perhaps in an academic journal article in the future.
Right, I think,
Of course, I agree there should be an
that
age
gives
of
us a
consent.
clue about where your mindset is.
Wait, let me make one thing clear. I believe in an age of consent.
Where?
100%.
What age?
I'm not going into that. I would write about that in an academic journal article.
Well, very interesting there, Charles. Thank you for sharing your...
Very interesting, yes, indeed. Incredibly, very super interesting. Also very disturbing. Libertarianism, not even once, mate. Not even once. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p. So be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.
Stateless liberty. Right. We'll get this. Thank you, Scribby. Stateless liberty. I'll just tell this live. There we go. Tale of Scribby. This one. Yeah. No, Alexandra. That one. Sweet. Here we go.
master who forces
Back to the beginning.
Robert Nozick developed something called the Tale of the Slave. It's very brief, goes through 9 quick stages. Nozick invites you to imagine yourself as the slave in the story. Stage 1 is that you are indeed a slave subject to a brutal master who forces you to work for him and who beats you arbitrarily. In the second stage, the master lightens up a bit, and he beats you only for breaking the rules, and he even grants you some free time. In the third stage, we add the additional dimension that you are one of a group of slaves subject to this master, and this master, based on principles that are acceptable to all of you, decides how goods will be allocated among you. In the fourth stage, you even get some time off. You have to work for the master for only 3 days per week. The other 4 days are your own. In stage 5, you even get to work wherever you want, but you have to remit to the master 3/7 of your wages to correspond to the 3 days out of 7 that you once worked for him. He also retains the right to recall you into service in emergencies and to increase at any time the fraction of your wages to which he lays claim. Then, in stage 6, everyone, all let's say 10,000 slaves, except you, are granted the right to vote. So they get to decide what is allowed and what is not allowed. They get to decide what fraction of your wages will be taken away and what outlets the money will be spent on. In stage 7, you still don't have the right to vote, but you are allowed to try to persuade those who can vote to exercise their powers in a particular way. In stage 8, you are granted the right to vote, but only to break a tie. You write down your vote, and if a tie should occur, your vote is opened up and recorded. No tie has ever occurred. Finally, in stage 9, you are fully granted the right to vote. But this simply means, functionally, that as in stage 8, in case of a tie, your vote carries the issue. But there has never been a tie. Nozick's question is this: at what stage between 1 and 9 did this become something other than the tale of a slave? That's the kind of mind-blowing question that makes you rethink everything you've been taught about taxation and society, government. It's the kind of thing that makes you skeptical of government propaganda from that moment on. And that's precisely why Nozick's question is never asked.
Thank you, Scribbly. Ah. Thanks. I have no idea who Murray Rothbard is. Murray Rothbard. Explained? Hmm? What? Oh, wait. Oh, God, no. Oh God. He's Austrian school. Huh. It's like some of these are long. No. Maybe not then. Narco. Let's try this one then.
Do you hate the state? Do you hate that vile institution of theft, war, and genocide so much that you're willing to abolish it completely? Then you are an anarchist. But anarchism only describes what you're against, not what you're for. So to determine what you are for, you need to answer this question. Is money, capitalism, force, or is it consent? If you answered that money is consent,
Force.
then you are an anarcho-capitalist. So you can call me Ezekiel. This is anarcho-capitalism. Let's jump in. The most basic function of the state is to protect its citizens from those who would do them harm. Any man who seeks to harm another is, by definition, a criminal. To this end, the state taxes its people to finance their protection. People may believe that a state has additional functions on top of this, but all statists, from minarchists to totalitarian socialists, agree that protecting its people from criminals is the fundamental function of the state. But, according to ANCAPs, there's a problem here. A tax-funded protection agency is a contradiction in terms. Anyone trying to tax you is robbing you. They are the criminals you need protection from. But let's say that you try to be clever. What if you were to support the government that's robbing you on the grounds that it's at least robbing you less than another worse robber would? Well, things might not turn out the way you'd hoped, because there's still the question of how much protection you need, and how much you should be charged for it. Who gets to make that decision? The government, of course. And since you're being taxed against your will, not charged for a service you've consented to, you get no say in the matter. In fact, any effort to resist will be treated as a crime. Naturally, the government will always advocate for more and more defense, and use that to justify the further taxation it would require. Now, the government may defer this theft by taking on debt, or hide it through inflation. But one way or another, you're gonna get robbed. By the way, I would like to take this opportunity to say that the libertarian slogan, "taxation is theft," is wrong. You see, during taxation, the government is saying that they will send scary men to do horrible things to you unless you fork over your valuables. This means that taxation isn't theft. It's way more like armed robbery.
Way more like armed robbery? What the fuck? Oh God. I miss the Beast. He was brilliant. Ah, let's do that. Ennis Skinner versus Emily Meatless 9 years ago. Here we go.
Dennis Skinner, thanks very much indeed. In that breaking news, then, Dennis Skinner has said that he has not been approached for a job by Jeremy Corbyn and would not take a job by Jeremy Corbyn, a line that he has held consistently.
I told Jeremy Corbyn before.
There you go. You can keep up to date with all the latest developments and appointments over the BBC News website, including a guide to who's who in Jeremy Corbyn's new shadow cabinet, bbc.co.uk/news. Seems I still have business to do right here on the green.
Well, that was spinning. That was an example of spinning. Because you were trying to imply that I'd turned it down.
No, that was a joke.
Well,
that's
I think
all
it's
it was.
time
It was a joke.
that you got real and you understood that you're not working for Murdoch at the BBC because you seem to be following the same pattern.
Dennis Skinner, thanks for clarifying that. Thank you very much. Back to you, Joanna. We're just rescuing our microphone right now.
Oops. I'm open to suggestions. Sorry, all of the. Here we go.
Very few things in history are black and white. A lot of it is grey, and that includes the Civil War. It was actually fighting.
History. Socialism, obviously. Right-wingers getting dunked on. Always fun. Film is good for that. Basically, what I've been doing tonight. Anything that can expand my brain. Hang on, I will show you. Let's do this.
For states' rights.
States' rights to do what?
Excuse me, sir?
States' rights to do what? What did you want to use those rights for? You usually don't mention that part. I want to hear it. I wonder what you want to do with them.
Well, the Confederacy didn't want to be oppressed by the North.
Really? What were they preventing you from doing? What did they not want you to do?
Listen, my friend, there was more to it than slavery for why we made the Confederacy.
That is really, really interesting because the guy who made the Confederacy, the vice president, said that it was because they wanted to have slavery, and all the state constitutions said they wanted to have slavery, and they seceded the moment that the president got elected that was going to abolish slavery. Boy, the Confederacy sure looks slavery adjacent, at least. No, anyways, states' rights do what?
You're ignoring our other concern.
Yeah, but among the concerns was slavery, so I don't care because you deserve it because you're evil. And slavery is evil. You should know this. By the way, could you answer my question, you fucking traitor? States' rights to do what?
Well, it's our heritage.
It lasted 5 years. The Annoying Orange has existed longer than the Confederacy did. The fucking Annoying Orange, dude. You're gonna celebrate a nation so fucking weak the Annoying Orange outlived it?
Well, states' rights.
Got Douglas.
Each Dixie boy must understand that he must mind his Uncle Sam away, away. We'll all go down to Dixie.
Love it. Oh, right. Where is it? Oh, there's there. Oh, thanks. Oh, it's Dennis again. Whoops. Wrong link. Huh. Where is it? Oi, chat. Give me that link. Bring it, Jim. Bring it. Scrubby's put one. I can see it here, but it's not on this chat, which I'll link from. Curious. Let's see if leaving. Coming back. Stream manager. Text. There we go. Get in there. No. Where is it? Gimme. That's weird. Can you give me the actual title, Scribby? Let's see this one. Go. And thanks. One more. Oops. This. Go. This one. No. Weird. Weird angle coming. Jim, thank you. I got that one, Scribby. Back. Watch later. Come on. There we go. 6 minutes.
Mrs. Gould, your question, please.
Mrs. Thatcher, why, when the Belgrano, the Argentinian battleship, was outside the exclusion zone and actually sailing away from the Falklands, why did you give the orders to sink it?
But it was not sailing away from the Falklands. It was in an area which was a danger to our ships and to our people on them.
Outside the exclusion zone.
But it was in an area which we had warned. At the end of April, we had given warnings that all ships in those areas, if they represented a danger to our ships, were vulnerable. When it was sunk, that ship which we had found was a danger to our ships. My duty was to look after our troops, our ships, our navy. And my goodness me, I lived with many, many anxious days and nights.
Mrs. Thatcher, you started your answer by saying it was not sailing away from the Falklands. It was on a bearing of 280, and it was already west of the Falklands. So I'm sorry, but I cannot see how you can say it was not sailing away from the Falklands.
When it was sunk.
When it was sunk.
It was a danger to our ships.
No, but you have just said at the beginning.
I was heading back home. I wasn't going to the islands. I was going back. We know this. She is lying.
Of your answer that it was not sailing away from the Falklands, and I'm asking you to correct that statement.
But it's within an area outside the exclusion zone, which I think what you are saying is sailing away.
I think which way it was facing at the time.
A danger to our ships.
Mrs. Thatcher, I am saying that it was on a bearing 280, which is a bearing just north of west. It was already west of the Falklands, and therefore nobody with any imagination can put it sailing other than away from the Falklands.
I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Mrs. Gould.
Mrs. Gould. When the orders were given to sink it, and when it was sunk, it was in an area which was a danger to our ship.
Trust me, someone I know who was on another vessel, he was a what rank was he? He was in the Navy, essentially. And I asked him, was the Belgrano sailing away? Yes. Did they know that? Yes, they did. Well, they still sunk it. She lying. Correct.
Well, now, you accept that, do you?
No, I don't.
I'm sorry, it was, and you must accept that
Mrs.
when we
Thatcher,
gave the order, when we changed the rules which enabled them to sink Belgrano, the change of rules had been notified at the end of April. It was all published that any ships that were a danger to ours within a certain zone wider than the Falklands were likely to be sunk. And again, I do say to you, my duty, and I'm very proud that we...
Oh, Jim, I love you. You're amazing. Thanks so much. God damn it. Back to Diana. Carry on, lady. You're doing well.
Put it this way and adhered to it, was to protect the lives of the people in our ships and the enormous numbers of troops that we had down there waiting for landings. I put that duty first. And when the Belgrano was sunk, and I ask you to accept this, she was in a position which was a danger to our Navy.
Mrs. Gould, let me ask you this, Mrs. Gould. What motive are you seeking to attack?
Plus, the Belgrano was old as balls. It was a former US Navy ship the Argentinians had bought was from the Second World War. At that point, it was nearly 40 years old. It was fucking ancient. I try not to rage. I hate her with Gideon a close second, because that man is a demon. So is she. Yeah. I was born. 3 months later, she became PM. Fuck. My poor mum.
Attached to Mrs. Thatcher and her government in this? Is it the inefficiency, lack of communication, or is it the desire for action, a desire for war?
It is a desire for action and a lack of communications, because on giving those orders to sink the Belgrano, when it was actually sailing away from our fleet and away from the Falklands, was in effect sabotaging any possibility of any peace plan succeeding. And Mrs. Thatcher had 14 hours in which to consider the Peruvian peace plan that was being put forward to her, in which those 14 hours, those orders could have been rescinded.
Right.
She was never going to listen to it. We know this. Lots of notes have been released since. So she was never going to even recognise it. We know this. In some ways, this saved the Royal Navy, because they were about to basically, maybe not completely destroy it, but half it, essentially. Mothball lots of ships. This war saved the Royal Navy in some ways. The admirals were happy. Wow. Good for them, I guess. Oops. Sorry about that. Go back.
One day, all of the facts in about 30 years' time will be published.
Yes.
It's not good enough.
Yes, he is.
I am
We
just.
Mrs. Good,
would you
let
please
Mrs. Thatcher answer.
let
I
me
think
answer?
You've put a fair point.
Would you please let me answer? I lived with the responsibility for a very long time. I answered the question giving the facts, not anyone's opinions, but the facts. Those Peruvian peace proposals, which were only in outline, did not reach London until after the attack on the Belgrano. That is fact. I'm sorry.
Yes. The concept of a short, victorious war saved her. If it wasn't for this, she wouldn't have got voted back in. This saved her in 83. Damn it. Then more years of her. God damn it. Galtieri, you fuckwit. Well, yeah. Because he was positioning himself to stab her, either in the back or the front, politically, of course. But then, when she did step down, the stalking horse won. The grey man, brilliant, sold off screeds of our public services. Thanks, Major. You're a dick also.
That is fact, and I am going to finish. Did not reach London until after the attack on the Belgrano. Moreover, we went on negotiating.
Always found that funny, Jim. Hilarious, really.
Negotiating for another fortnight after that attack. I think it could only be in Britain that a Prime Minister was accused of sinking our Navy. That was my main motive, and I...
Damn. They'll do as they're told. I if I remember correctly. I can't go and look it up. Copyright. Damn it.
I'm very proud of it.
That incarnation, at least. I think the newer stuff might be okay, but that older stuff, copyright claim, can't show it. Ooh.
One day all the facts will be revealed and they will indicate as I have said.
Mrs. Gould, have you got a new point to make? Otherwise I must move
just
on.
one point. I understood that the Peruvian peace plans on a nationwide programme were discussed on the midnight May the 1st. If that outline did not reach London for another
Mrs.
14
Thatcher
hours,
has said that it didn't.
I think there must be something very seriously wrong with our communications, and we are living in a nuclear age when we're going to have minutes to make decisions, not hours.
Let's
I
move
have
on.
indicated what the facts are, and would you accept that I am in a position to know exactly when they reached London, exactly when the attack was made? But I repeat.
Sozold, welcome. Hello. Dunking on Maggie. Always fun.
The job of the Prime Minister is to protect the lives of our boys on our ships.
Let's move
And
on
I'm
to
proud that
discuss
that's what I
that
did.
nuclear age, Mrs. Thatcher. We've got a lot of questions on
Excuse
the
me?
case, as you might imagine.
So in this segment, we're going to be discussing why Ed Miliband was right not to...
Oh, sorry, Madge. Let's go to Kane Skills. He's got a video. Kane Skills. They've got a video about her, and it's great. Oi, gimme. Thank you. Kane Skills. Where are you? Oh, he's quite far down. Ah, there he's there. Videos. Is it? Aha! This is brilliant. I like this one.
Hey, it's Kay. And this is Skittles, Treasury Secretary. Neoliberalism, the ideological belief in the free market, in deregulation and reduced government interference. Or at least that's how it's typically discussed. Today we're going to...
Oof. Scrubby. My comrade. If it needs fix, get to a hospital. Alright? You don't need to say anything about it. But if the wound is looking... yeah, go and get it checked. That happened with me. I had my gallbladder removed, and the wounds kept on suppurating. They were... So I had to go back. I just went to the...
explore and often...
Whoops. The treatment room for my GP. They fixed it. All good to them. All good now. That was... 13? 14? I'll be 14 years next year. It wasn't good. And my gallbladder, dear God. When they checked all the stones, it was mostly runoff from the NSAIDs, the anti-inflammatory I'd been on since I was 11. It literally clogged up my gallbladder and the bile duct. It was not good. That was the most horrible pain for like 8 hours. Super hubby. Had to call an ambulance to get me to the hospital.
An overlooked aspect of neoliberalism that even many of its critics miss. To do that, we have to go back to what is commonly considered the beginning of the neoliberal turn. Long before Clinton's market-based solutions to education and housing, even a few years before Reagan started arming Contras, in a putrid grey island nation that is known to historians only as the United Kingdom. In the 1980s, this wretched place was ruled by a great evil. Even today, its name is whispered in hushed tones, lest her spectre be summoned. They say,
"Don't ruin fritters. Bad. Just salt and vinegar. On the roll. That's it. Mushy peas. Fuck off."
Say on a cool, quiet night, if you put your ear to the ground, you can still hear her, burning in hell. World War II, and you may have heard this, was a pretty bad time. In an effort to avoid a repeat of the severe depression and social unrest that followed the First World War, the British coalition government, headed by Churchill and Attlee, promised the development of a strong set of publicly owned services following World War II. This would be delivered by the following Labour government and included the NHS and a robust welfare system. This led to a sort of Keynesian mixed economy that is often referred to as the post-war consensus. This saw Labour and...
Do you not know what dreamies are? They're for cats. The little treats. They're essentially like chocolate bar for them. My actual neighbour has a cat called Tilly. That's all she'll eat. But she's had to be put on a diet. They're essentially like sugar to them. So Tilly isn't coping well. Let's put it that way.
Even conservative governments tolerating trade unions at a level they had not before and never would again. In return, the labor unions would play ball and not do anything too revolutionary. This strong labor movement, combined with the aforementioned public investment, led to rapid increase in living conditions for many, as poverty rates plummeted from 18% before the war to an estimate between 4 and 9% by the 50s. Basically, this was the last time things were looking up for anyone except landlords on the British Isles. Thatcher's election in 1979 was in part a response to a series of economic crises that had defined the 70s, including a global stock market crash, a banking crisis, and an oil crisis. Her response to this economic instability was a simple one. The free market would get us out of this jam, but to free the market, we have to destroy the post-war consensus and suppress labor unions who are restricting the market with pesky inefficiencies like workers' rights. During Thatcher's reign, she would transition both the economic model of the UK, but also the ideological norms of the country towards neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is free market ideology. It holds that if we deregulate the market, it can and will solve our economic problems and lead to greater prosperity for all. John the Duncan, who makes a lot of great videos about neoliberalism, cites award-winning American economist Joseph Stiglitz, describing neoliberalism as
that grab bag of ideas based on the fundamentalist notion that markets are self-correcting, allocate resources efficiently, and serve the public interest well. It was this market fundamentalism that underlay Thatcherism, Reaganomics, and the so-called Washington Consensus in favour of privatisation, liberalisation, and independent central banks focusing single-mindedly on inflation.
John goes on to rightly point out a problem with the way Stiglitz characterizes neoliberalism. He is certainly criticizing neoliberalism in this article, which opens by saying, history has not been kind to neoliberalism. But he does so in a way that makes a crucial mistake. And it's a mistake that is echoed by the helpful What is Neoliberalism explainers put out by the BBC and Harvard University that come up first if you search neoliberalism on YouTube. Both Stiglitz, the highly regarded academic, and these serious, well-resourced institutions are assuming that the rhetoric of neoliberalism necessarily lines up with the economic policy of neoliberalism, which wouldn't be a problem unless politicians weren't always completely honest with us.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on
Parliament.
and tell lies?
Neoliberalism is best understood in two halves: ideology and economics. The small state, free market fetishizing narrative about neoliberalism that we see from Stiglitz and most mainstream discussions of neoliberalism is often treated as if it is its economic policy, when in fact it is its ideological policy. The idea that the market possesses an almost mystical capacity for self-correction and management, if only the darn state would stay out of its way, is an ideological statement. And ideology isn't for your leaders, it's for you. So why do I describe what many consider to be the heart of neoliberalism as ideological but not economic? Because neoliberal governments like Thatcher's do not actually shrink the state or follow a policy of non-interference in the market. Like the neoliberals who would follow her, Thatcher loved the state. In fact, Thatcher significantly expanded the police and security aspects of the state throughout her time in power. This was necessary in part to combat organized labor, from which she was attempting to strip crucial rights and protections. In addition, Thatcher's government maintained what Richard Woodward calls a dual industrial policy. This is the practice of rhetorically opposing state intervention in the market, while in reality intervening quite extensively. Thatcher's government actually subsidized key industries, including the automotive industry, which also featured a bailout of British Leyland to the tune of just under £1 billion, which, adjusted for inflation, is worth in 2022. The agriculture industry also received enormous subsidies, and in 1981, Thatcher defended the heavy subsidization of British farms after promising that the state...
Thanks for dropping by. Bye. Sozzled. Much appreciated. Sweet dreams. Catch you later. Stay based.
would stop interfering in the market by stating that our farmers are being asked to compete not on equal terms, but against heavily subsidized competitors. We like equality now, Maggie. This is a very revealing statement. It is an admission that the fundamental argument that industry is at its best when unregulated and free of the state is incorrect. If left to their own devices, British agriculture companies would not have been able to compete with those of other countries operating on a more Keynesian model, where many are partially or entirely nationalized and subsidized with public money. That economic model simply competes more effectively. Keep that idea in mind for a little later. So, how did she get away with this? Taking every opportunity to extol the virtues of state non-interference in industry and using that firmly held belief to attack regulations on businesses and workers' rights, and then turning around and massively subsidizing private industry. That kind of hypocrisy should have been political self-destruction, surely. Well, she deployed a very clever trick that is known in the field of political science as lying.
You really think someone would do that?
Woodward's research into the spending of Thatcher's government found that while on paper industrial subsidy reduced during Thatcher's leadership, enormous sums of government spending were simply being categorized as something else. For example, billions of pounds of agricultural subsidy were instead classified as departmental research, advisory services, and administration. I'm completely serious. It's as simple as that. They just classified their subsidies as something else in the treasury and said, look, we're spending less on subsidies. British journalists on social media are always announcing how important they are for holding power accountable and keeping the public informed. So it may surprise you to learn that this scandal...
No, they weren't. Well, maybe a little bit back then, or not now. Not at all. Because they didn't do Leveson 2. That'll be the hill I die on, I bet. Been screaming into the void about it ever since.
This practice of misrepresenting state spending to give the appearance of a commitment to unimpeded free market policy went largely uninvestigated by the media at the time. There was and has continued to be a tendency to focus exclusively on official statements and not, what Thatcher's government actually did. Woodward described this as leading to a state-orchestrated masquerade, in which the very people who should have been criticizing the inconsistencies between Thatcher's ideological rhetoric and...
And also, I didn't know that. Thanks, Jim. Fuck. My God. Different light. I'll be looking at it now. Wow. Thank you, Jim. Gold star.
actual economic
Whoops. Come back.
policy were instead complicit in it. Perhaps the extremely wealthy owners of our papers and news networks, who were no doubt ecstatic that the tide was turning against labor unions, had something to do with that. Remember, ideology isn't for them, it's for you. Thatcher is famously quoted as saying, "Economics are the method, the object is to change the heart and soul." Her neoliberal project was not just about selling off publicly owned industries while pumping money into the pockets of private industrialists, although that was one of her signature moves.
British gas shares, they come out in November. If you see Sid, tell him.
Her project was about reorienting the way the people view themselves and their relationship to the state. The post-war consensus imbued the public with the idea that the state owes them. Regular working-class people fought in 2 world wars, rebuilt the country after both of them, and did all of the work that actually keeps the country running. It was justified for them to expect that the state in turn would look after them. This was the idea that Thatcher aimed to dismantle. By cultivating a sense that people are not members of a society in which they owe each other something, but sovereign, entrepreneurial individuals whose value is dictated by their personal financial achievements. The perception of state assistance and publicly owned services began to change. During the post-war period, welfare was seen by many workers as a victory. Their struggles in the labor movement led to a system where if a worker lost their job, was injured, or became ill and unable to work for long periods, the country that their labor had been propping up would have to look after them. They put in, and they could take out when they needed it. But if people are not members of society, but individuals responsible for their own economic security, welfare becomes something shameful. A worker claiming welfare is no longer enjoying their hard-earned right as a worker. They are experiencing failure as an individual who has been unable to support themselves without state assistance. This led to a stigma around benefits, which, of course, has continued to the modern day. And this stigma spread throughout the public services. The state providing something for you became an embarrassment, a shameful thing. Unless, of course, you're a wealthy industrialist accepting millions in government grants. But by concealing the subsidization of private industry and demonizing public services used by the working class, Thatcher eroded solidarity among the working class and transformed many working people from class-conscious subjects who understood their position in society into temporarily embarrassed middle-class homeowners. With programs like Right to Buy, she touted homeownership as the ultimate expression of both success and security. Climbing the ladder to become middle class became the new avenue for a worker to improve their conditions, rather than unionizing and struggling for better pay and conditions with other workers. And she was quite successful at increasing the number of homeowners who would now have a personal economic incentive to support certain conservative policies, which she achieved again via government subsidy. She once again interfered in the free market to expand the homeowning population, a crucial step in ideologically shifting the British public towards neoliberal ideals. On the eve of the Thatcherite crusade, half of all workers were trade unionists. By 1995, the number had fallen to a third. The old industries associated with working-class identity were being destroyed. There no longer seemed anything to celebrate about being working class. But Thatcherism promised an alternative. Leave the working class behind, it said, and come join the property-owning middle classes instead. Those who failed to do so would have no place in the new Britain. Another way Thatcher's project was damaging ideologically is it instilled the idea in the public that capitalism and the state are diametrically opposed, that they are antithetical to each other, and as one grows, the other must therefore shrink. In fact, it is a direct byproduct of Thatcherism and the neoliberal turn that so many people who themselves have a fairly sophisticated understanding of capitalism and its problems still view anything other than full-blown libertarian free market economics as somehow hostile to capitalism as a system. Think socialism is when the government does stuff, when the reality is that capitalism needs the state for a great deal of important functions. The state is able to centralize military power and control a monopoly on direct force. Through that force, it is able to protect property rights, which is extremely important if your wealth comes from owning property, rather than selling your labor. It also serves to discipline labor by breaking strikes, criminalizing undesirable behavior, and protecting you, the boss or landlord, from physical retaliation for your economic violence against your workers and tenants. And that's to say nothing of the capacity of the state to subjugate other economies for the enrichment of capitalists at home. We're going to free your economy, even if we have to murder and enslave you to do it. By obfuscating these aspects of the state's function, assisted by a deeply incurious media, by concealing the theft of billions of public funds which were funneled into the private sector, by insisting that they are shrinking the state while expanding its authority, the neoliberal politician is able to create an ideological environment where people can oppose the state, oppose all social programs, and associate those positions with greater social and economic freedom, all while supporting the armed aspects of the state which actually enforce a certain social and economic status quo, which reduce both personal and collective freedom, all while never feeling for a second that your views are contradictory. And that is the heart of a lot of modern conservative politics in the UK, the US, and beyond. In Tom Crompton's fantastic essay, Thatcher's Spiral, he lays out the way that Thatcher's political opponents not only sabotaged themselves, but contributed to her ideological process by making the mistake of accepting the premise of her politics. He describes how her opposition adopted her vocabulary, discussing things like labor market flexibility and optimizing labor market performance. Even if they're using these terms to suggest that Thatcher is underperforming in regards to these categories, it accepts the premise of the categories themselves, which is that workers are a commodity in the marketplace. He describes her opposition attacking her government for creating low consumer confidence, which accepts the premise that the reason we work is to consume. In fact, I did precisely this earlier in this video when I noted that Thatcher had to subsidize British farms because they couldn't outcompete other countries' agriculture industries. It's a point that highlights her hypocrisy and total ideological dishonesty, but it also kind of tacitly accepts the idea that the primary goal of the industry that grows our food ought to be competing in the market. The reason we shouldn't want our farms to be run by private interests is not because they compete more effectively when nationally run or funded, but because the production of our food should not be directed by the interests of a few incredibly rich landowners, who themselves will never want for food. because our need to eat often contradicts the needs of the market, as seen in the metric tons of food destroyed every year because overproduction would drive prices down and crash the industry, while people are literally starving. Just as Thatcher's political opponents defeated themselves by accepting her ideological premises uncritically, if we wish to criticize and understand neoliberalism today, we cannot make the mistake of taking it at face value. Arguing against an ethos of privatization and small government is not a problem in and of itself, but doing so risks accepting the premise that this is the primary objective of neoliberal politics. While Thatcher and the many neoliberal governments around the world that followed her absolutely carried out privatization and deregulation, they aggressively used the state. The state is a tool, and it can be used to direct public money. That's taxpayer money and the income from publicly owned services into the hands of their friends. Neoliberalism is a project of theft. Theft of the services and money that we own, that we ought to control. And theft of our sense of self, our ability to see ourselves as human actors and not market commodities. And certainly the theft of resources from countries who cannot defend themselves from major powers. Neoliberal governments do not promote free trade, they promote their control over trade, especially through imperialism. They do not promote free association between workers and bosses, they promote greater control of bosses over workers. And they do not promote smaller government, they expand the aspects of government that exert control on you and me. When you strip away all the rhetoric about the free market and the cute pseudo-economics, that's the only thing you find in the black heart of neoliberalism, a ravenous need for control. No matter how many people have to die or how many governments we have to coup.
Oops.
So why on earth should our main arguments about neoliberalism be about the free market? What free market?
Skittles. The ferret. Oh, Skittles. She is brilliant. And funny. I love ferrets. They're mad at times.
All the kids are Boston.
Okay. Let's see. Eleanor? Eleanor. Videos. Oh. Where is it? It was a while ago. Should just. Where is it? The app, there's there.
So it's the election tomorrow. Tomorrow, people will go to the polls to decide who is going to be the next Prime Minister. And of course, it will be Keir Starmer. The Labour Party are going to win the next election. If you've tuned into my channel, or you've followed my channel, or you're just reading it for the first time, most people will know I am a progressive. I am a leftist. I am on the left of politics. And this is my plea to other progressive and left-leaning people to not vote for the Labour Party. I'll be voting for the Green Party, but this video specifically is why you should not vote for the Labour Party. You should not vote for Keir Starmer. He is going to win the election with right-wingers voting for his right-wing platform. He does not need our votes. We need to show the Labour Party they cannot rely on progressive people's votes for a platform that is in no way progressive. Not only is their platform not progressive, but Keir Starmer himself, as a politician, and the people in his shadow cabinet are not fit to lead this country. He is not fit to be Prime Minister. What I'm going to do in this video is try and explain to you exactly why Keir Starmer is not fit to be Prime Minister. The first thing that we have to talk about with Keir Starmer is that he lies. He lies constantly. He lies maliciously with complete impunity. He had 10 pledges.
Damn it. I knew this would happen. Be right back.
and he broke all of them. He lies about everything he believes in and he supports. He lied about trying to unify the Labour Party, and he kicked out everybody who disagreed. He even told people he would end the factional war and try and unite the party. That was a lie. He said he wouldn't impose candidates from the NEC. That was a total lie as well. When it comes to the pledges, they've all been scrapped. They were all lies as well. Nationalising mail, energy and water. Getting rid of tuition fees, freedom of movement as we leave the European Union, increasing the taxes on the top 5% of earners, abolishing the House of Lords. Pledge after pledge after pledge has been laid by the wayside, all gone on the cutting room floor, and there's nothing left. It was all a pack of lies and a deliberate set of lies to hoodwink the Labour membership into voting for him so he could then purge them afterwards. There were nothing but lies. Don't try and tell me there's about the changing economic situation. There's no reason why the economy is in such a way that we can't increase taxes on the rich. But there was another promise that he deliberately broke, because the man is a liar, and you should not trust him, and that fact alone should be enough to think him unfit to be Prime Minister. That fact alone should make him unfit to be Prime Minister. We just ejected Boris Johnson for being a serial liar, for being a compulsive liar. He wasn't fit for office because he lied with complete impunity. Why should anything be different because of Keir Starmer? Keir Starmer is a Conservative. He admits it as such. He said he was proud to be called a Conservative, and that if people called him one, he didn't care. He said that Labour Party represented true conservatism that the Conservative Party has abandoned. People like Anna Soubry have described the Labour Party as adopting her one nation conservative values. He has turned the Labour Party into a right-wing, monetarist, authoritarian, transphobic and racist party of capital. And what is part of that is they are promising 5 more years of austerity, privatisation and policy for big business. They have promised to increase levels of private.
Reeves has literally stuck to the scum economic policies. So, Tory. Again. Fuck off.
Privatisation in our NHS by selling bits off and having more money being pumped into private provision of healthcare, allowing BlackRock to control our infrastructure with more PFI deals, PFI 2.0, on far more steroids that Blair ever did on. He's taking bungs from the super rich personally, and he is not raising any of their taxes. No wealth taxes, increase in capital gains tax, nothing like that is in the manifesto. So you should not vote for it. They have become the party of capital. They've embedded their cabinet and their PPCs with lobbyists for private water, private equity, private finance, all number of think tanks and people with links to dark money. They have happily gotten businesses round the table to set policy. They described when they went to the banks saying that our manifesto has your fingerprints all over it. Rachel Reeves supported the Edinburgh reforms that cut liquidity requirements for private insurers by up to 60%, allowing them to gamble further with our money and lose at a time at which the need for insurance is much higher because of the greater risk of natural disaster. That is because they have links to so many people who are representing capital rather than representing Labour. Labour are an anti-trans party. Labour are explicitly transphobic party. What they are offering is a Section 28 on trans people. Keir Starmer said he wanted to not have gender ideology taught in schools. They are making it harder for people to transition. They are also, on top of that, wanting to make it harder for people to get a gender recognition certificate by increasing the time that you need to have gone through after applying for one for it to be able to go through. They have also kept transphobic people within their party, continually referring to them as people who are important members of the party. They have said transphobic things on camera, where Streeting has done it, gone off to Julie Hartley-Brewer and people from the Sun saying that he doesn't think trans women are women. And that's the person going to be in charge of trans people's healthcare. If you value the transgender community, if you value the LGBT community at large, you should not vote for the Labour Party. The Labour Party is an institutionally racist party. They purge candidates that speak up about racism, like Faiza Shaheen. They get rid of Jewish members from the party who say things that are outside of their line on the Israel-Palestine conflict. They threatened to gag Martin Ford, who was a lawyer who they hired to investigate what was going on with racism internally within the party. They threatened to gag him because he was too critical about how they dealt with it.
They didn't manage it. Because only the bench can. They went to him. He done this report, and then they tried to rubbish him. This man has been in the law profession for decades. The amount of skill and insight Martin Ford has is phenomenal. Just because they didn't like I support. They tried to destroy him. Bastards.
Islamophobia and anti-black racism within the Labour Party. If you care about minority communities in this country, you should not vote for the Labour Party. Labour are internally corrupt. Labour himself and his leadership team, Labour Together, are funded by investment bankers, hedge funders, and lobbyists for foreign countries. Their donations have breached the Electoral Commission's laws on private donations. Starmer himself has accepted more private gifts than any Labour leader in decades. Rachel Reeves took a donation from a climate denier the week before they scrapped their pledge to investigate 28 billion in green power. And on top of that, they are happy to have people like PricewaterhouseCoopers and private consultancies stuff their offices for free, which again means they are getting return on investment from that extra money that's been pumped in and from those free secondments they've gotten from people like PricewaterhouseCoopers. Starmer said, and I quote, that Israel has that right to restrict water, food and fuel to the Palestinians in Gaza. He did this 3 times and even sent out Emily Thornberry to repeat it again on Newsnight before U-turning. He whipped Labour MPs to oppose a vote on a ceasefire in Parliament. He reportedly nobbled Lindsay Hoyle in the back, the Speaker himself, into being able to kneecap the SNP tabled ceasefire motion. This man has betrayed the Labour Party's commitment to Palestine.
Whoops.
And any amount of U-turning he does
Sorry about that. Come back.
now that he's seen the Muslim communities and communities that care about the issues in Palestine, that is done in bad faith to try and win these people back. Not his genuine position was the one that he took initially after what happened in October. And he rejected a ceasefire for months and months and months and months and months until he realised there was political capital in assessing to one. If you care about Palestine, you should not vote Labour. Labour will open the door to NHS privatisation. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting promised to go further than Tony Blair in letting the private sector into the NHS. They have the same NHS plans essentially as Reform UK, which is to spend public money trying to say that they will use the private sector to bring down waiting lists when there is no extra spare private sector capacity in this country. There is no spare private sector capacity because it's all NHS staff doing overtime in the private sector. It is all NHS facilities being used by the private sector. There is very, very little extra spare private sector capacity. When Streeting tells you that there is, this is not true. Wes Streeting himself has received hundreds of thousands of pounds in donations with people with links to private healthcare investments. They're even running a private healthcare multi-millionaire in Islington North against Jeremy Corbyn. If you care about the NHS, you should not vote Labour. Labour has betrayed young people by scrapping climate commitments such as their green investment plans, U-turning on the licensing for the Rosebank oil field, and lying about their plans for a publicly owned energy company when GB Energy is just an investment fund to de-risk money in the private sector. They have happily had climate deniers in lists of candidates for MPs for the next election. If you care about the climate, do not vote for the Labour Party. Labour has abandoned the trade unions by banning MPs from showing solidarity on picket lines. Sam Tarry got sacked for this, by the way, by watering down their workers' rights plans after being lobbied by the businesses, and specifically the head of the CBI, whilst having a policy researcher for the CBI as an MP Keir Mather that is. They have also refused to back junior doctors' pay restoration and have undermined the rail strikes. If you care about the trade union movement, you should not vote for the Labour Party. Labour will not lift the 2-child benefit cap, keeping 500,000 children in poverty. This will keep the scandal of universal credit and will the Tories' vile sanctions regime. They will also keep the lifting.
SNP, up here, we're scrapping the 2-child and we're a fuel allowance. I got mines. Victory. I get 3 payments straight into my bank account. £58. After we sneezed it. Most of that did go to other stuff because we're not in another large proper flat. But it's good. We're using it for other stuff.
Of the cap on bankers' bonuses. Labour is for bankers, unfortunately, but not for children. If you care about child poverty, you should not vote for the Labour Party. Labour are happy to have multiple Tory MPs in their ranks. One of them described Labour as a bunch of C words, and went after that, and has also joined plenty of other. They are all welcome in Starmer's Labour Party, yet Jeremy Corbyn is not. Labour are still seeking advice from Peter Mandelson as well, by the way, so that probably doesn't need much explanation. Sam was a member of the Trilateral Commission. He has friends in the Britain America Project. The CPS destroyed his records of meeting with the United States around the extradition of Julian Assange. As DPP, he got people deported for stealing ice cream. He's nasty, he's vindictive, and he is an authoritarian who is in the pockets of the powerful. The Labour Party are now funded by billionaires rather than normal people. The trade unions have had to drop funding due to their internal betrayals. Hundreds of thousands of members have left or has been kicked out. Do you think these billionaires are now donating to the Labour Party for nothing, or are they expecting return on investment? If you value democratic politics and democratic participation and people-powered politics, you should not vote for the Labour Party. Keir Starmer betrayed the people of Liverpool by writing in The Sun. He is endorsed by the Murdoch-backed Times. He is also backed by the right-wing Economist magazine as well as the Financial Times. If you value the people of Liverpool and Merseyside and justice for the 97, you should not vote for the Labour Party. Tomorrow, the Tories will be toast. Labour are 20 points ahead in the polls and they are definitely going to win the election. Do you really need to abandon all of the things that you believe in just to replace the Tories with Tories in red ties? They don't need your vote to gain a huge majority, and if you do vote for them to gain a huge majority whilst rejecting all of those principles, you will give them an even bigger mandate to carry out their right-wing platform that you and I both don't support based on all of the things I've listed out today. There is no reason to give them that continual mandate, to let them know they can do whatever they want by moving to the right and still rely on your vote. Luckily for all of us though, hope has a new home. Hope has a new home today, chat. The Green Party have pledges to tax the rich, to treat migrants and trans people with respect, to invest in people and planet, to protect the NHS from privatisation and to put more money into it by taking the taxes from the rich and putting it into new capacity and better wages for doctors. They will take control of our water industry, end the scandal of sewage dumping by bringing the water back into public control. Better wages, better trade union rights, funding for cooperative ownership and community wealth building, and ending of arms sales to Israel, and indeed holding Israeli politicians to account with sanctions. It is a party funded by people, not profit, by being properly member-led and democratically driven. Now that is real hope and real change. If you, like me, are a progressive who wants progressive policy, who wants to help the poorest in society be a force for international peace and justice, please back me by joining and voting for the Green Party in the election tomorrow. A massive majority, a huge majority, will not make Labour any less sheepish. The Green Party MPs, how many that we get, hopefully as much as 4, they will be there to hold Labour to account in Parliament. Who else do you want holding them to account? Reform UK, the Conservative Party? Only the Green Party can hold Labour to account from the left. So if you want to see that in Parliament, you have to vote for it. So please vote Green on...
And to a certain extent, the 9 SNP, including Stephen Flynn, and my hometown, Dude, Peebleshire. Praise be.
On July the 4th, and we can build a future with real hope and real change.
Let's see. What am I in the mood for? Any suggestions? What have I got on my watch? Slayer. Okay. Hello. Welcome in. Great to see you. Let's see. Ooh. Well, that's an hour. I promise, SK, I'll get to you. I promise you. But dear God, best part of 4 hours. Not tonight.
Do vote for them to gain a huge majority.
Yeah. Let's go and look. Don't she?
In 2017, Mayor Mitch Landrieu and the New Orleans City Council voted to remove the 4 Confederate monuments around town. This was an incredibly controversial move. It sparked protests, fights broke out, and everybody had a really strong opinion one way or the other. But who put these monuments up and why? Was it truly to commemorate Southern heritage, or was it just a sinister tactic to intimidate African Americans? Well, I want to just kind of dig into the actual history and find out for myself. So I'm going to take each monument individually and look at the history and the intention behind them, and then I'm going to rate them for racism on the Confederate Monuments Racistometer. Here's how this piece of technology works. We have several categories here. The first is innocent, which means not at all racist. Ignorant, which means they really should have known better. Morally ambiguous, it could go either way. Pretty racist, which is bad. It's bad. And then Hitler, which really, you know, it just means Hitler.
Come back, Auntie.
So pretty much right after Robert E. Lee's death in 1870, a group of prominent ex-Confederates here in the city got together and tried to raise some money for a statue of him. It took them about 14 years to scrape together all the cash and the necessary permits and whatnot, and in 1884, they unveiled the monument over at Tivoli Circle in this big, lavish ceremony. Everybody was singing songs and speeches were made. Now, it seems the intention behind this whole ceremony was basically to unite both Union and Confederate veterans. Because, I mean, Robert E. Lee, he was a man who was greatly admired, both in the North and the South after the Civil War. Seems innocent enough, but the Lee Monument does have a pretty dark history. I mean, just 7 years after the monument went up, a xenophobic mob used it as a rallying point, and they then went and lynched 11 Italian immigrants. It's also been used as just a focal point for countless white supremacist rallies in the years since. So I'm going to give the Lee Monument a rating of ignorant. they really should have known better. The Battle of Liberty Place was fought in 1874. It was a pitched street battle here in New Orleans between a paramilitary organization called the White League, which is exactly what it sounds like, and the New Orleans Metropolitan Police. The White League was angry because their candidate for governor in the 1872 election had lost, and this was mainly due to the African American vote. The White League believed that black people did not deserve to have the vote, despite a constitutional amendment to the contrary. So they stormed into New Orleans, killed 100 people, and took control of City Hall for 3 days. Now, in 1891, the city put up a monument to the Battle of Liberty Place on Canal Street, which commemorated the White League as martyrs and heroes. In 1932, they added a marker, an inscription, on the monument, which read, "United States troops took over the state government and reinstated the usurpers, but the national election November 1876 recognized white supremacy in the South and gave us our state." The inscription remained there unaltered until 1974, when an adjacent marker was added, which read, "Although the Battle of Liberty Place and this monument are important parts of New Orleans history, the sentiments in favor of white supremacy expressed thereon are contrary to the philosophy and beliefs of present-day New Orleans." So that's a pretty flaccid response to an overtly racist monument. I hope nobody will argue with me here if I give the Battle of Liberty Place monument a rating of Hitler! In 1911, they put up a monument to Jefferson Davis, the first and only president of the Confederacy, that used to stand right here. So the funds were mainly raised by this group called the United Daughters of the Confederacy. They were responsible for putting up many monuments to the Confederacy all across the South. And they had this big lavish ceremony here, just with Lee's. They had a band playing Dixie. They had a gigantic Confederate flag made of flowers. It was really quite an event. But any monument reflects the time in which it was erected. And around World War I was an extremely turbulent time here in the South. It was the era of Jim Crow, was the height of Jim Crow. Lynchings were at an all-time high. And also the way that Southerners were thinking about the Civil War and remembering the Civil War was changing drastically. Now, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, they portrayed themselves as these sort of genteel, charming Southern women, but they were actually in the midst of this propaganda campaign that was really unrivaled throughout all of American history. They were some of the really, in many ways, the inventors of the lost cause myth of the Confederacy. I made a whole sort of video ranting about the lost cause myth and why it is just that, a myth, which should be appearing somewhere on your screen right now. So reputable historians these days agree. The lost cause myth, which, downplays the evils of slavery and really kind of romanticizes the antebellum South, really has no basis in fact. But that didn't stop people like the United Daughters of the Confederacy twisting the narrative. I think what's most telling, perhaps of all, is that this whole ceremony unveiling the Jeff Davis statue was a whites-only affair. So this was political propaganda, make no mistake. And I'm going to give the Jefferson Davis statue a rating of pretty racist. Last but not least was the statue of P.T. Beauregard, which went up in 1915 and stood over at Esplanade Avenue at the entrance to City Park. So Beauregard was a New Orleanian. He lived much of his life here. He was born and raised in South Louisiana, and I think if any Confederate general deserved a monument here, it would be him. He also was, a pretty complex guy. In sort of a weird kind of pragmatic way, after the war, he became a bit of a civil rights advocate. He thought that if white Southerners kept oppressing black Southerners, then Northern Republicans would get the African American vote, and time proved him right. You could certainly question whether that was due to his compassion for African Americans or just because he wanted to push his own political agenda. But even so, he did advocate for civil rights. But here's the thing. The statue of Beauregard was not of Beauregard the New Orleanian, or Beauregard the businessman, or Beauregard the civil rights advocate. It was very clearly a statue of Beauregard the Confederate. And it was put up by people with a crystal clear political agenda. You guessed it, it was the United Daughters of the Confederacy. So instead of portraying Beauregard the man, who was, I would say fairly morally ambiguous, the United Daughters of the Confederacy they decided to portray Beauregard as a symbol of the lost cause, which is undoubtedly pretty racist. So, to recap, we have 4 statues and 3 distinct ratings. Lee was ignorant. The Battle of Liberty Place was Hitler! Jeff Davis was pretty racist, and Beauregard was also pretty racist. So I think this leads to one really unavoidable conclusion. 3 out of these 4 monuments were put up by people who were not just racist by today's standards, but who adhered to a political ideology that was directly opposed to the progress of civil rights here in the United States. So were the Confederate monuments of New Orleans racist? Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Okay. Let's do this one. Lost cause. Never. Oh, cynical story. Order. Let's do the cynical story.
His channel is called Atunchi Films, so be sure to go over and check out his channel. There's a whole lot of stuff like... A previous version of this video was demonetized by manual review, despite the fact that YouTube's advertiser-friendly guidelines specifically state historical events are generally allowed to monetize if presented within the context of a documentary or historical debate. This video is very clearly about history and derived from a lecture I delivered in a college classroom, because this is a very important subject for American history. If that doesn't fit their advertiser guidelines for educational content, then they don't know what education means. So since YouTube won't support this kind of content, please consider buying some merch or donating to my Patreon, all of which are linked in the description. Since YouTube not only doesn't support education, but is blatantly willing to violate their own advertiser-friendly guidelines. Hey, Cypher here. I've talked a lot about the Lost Cause myth on this channel, mostly to denigrate it. After all, today, those who believe in it are nothing more than conspiracy theorists, and are merely spouting it off as a form of hatred. But here's the thing. It didn't start off as a hateful ideology, and has played an integral role in US history. Just as it is important to understand the origins of the Ku Klux Klan, it is important to understand the origins of the Lost Cause myth. And the fact is, it's held a pretty legitimate space in our history for a very long time, including a number of historians propounding it, and not just Woodrow Wilson, who after all was actually one of its main proponents, and we'll get to that. But I want to start this off by saying, this is an exercise in what Sun Tzu said, know thine enemy. For while we should absolutely denounce people who are spouting off this myth today,
Lost Causer,
we should realize the role the Lost Cause myth played in American history.
Fun fact, Cypher's actual dad, Beard of Knowledge, from Pawn Stars. Always found that funny.
So the lost cause of the Confederate States of America is a mythology that eulogizes the Confederacy. Since it is a mythology, it is not a clear movement. One can hold any number of tenets and be a lost causer, and not even realize it, for that's the pernicious effect of mythology. So there's some general tenets that can easily identify a lost causer. And all of these are often tinged with overt racism today, but that wasn't exactly always the case. Some of these were actually believed, and we'll see why. So the first one was that slavery was good for the slaves. You could see this part of the myth growing before the South even arose. Pro-slavery advocates in the 1850s often talked about how slavery was supposedly beneficial for those who were enslaved. That it was a teaching experience as they became more civilized, or that it was a means of fighting off socialism. And mind you, when these guys were referring to socialism, this is before even the likes of Karl Marx really started to take hold of the movement. So they're talking about like Saint Simon and those guys, the utopian socialists as they're often called. And there's a wealth of literature about these pro-slavery advocates. For instance, you had guys like James Henry Thornwell, who, as one historian says, unlike capitalism or communism, which Thornwell believed altered social norms, he avowed that slavery was part of the social fabric and therefore unalterable. He even believed that Southern slaves had better lives than the British working class. And you'll find a lot of that kind of rhetoric with pro-slavery Southerners in the 1850s. So of course that got incorporated into the general myth. The next part is probably the one that you'll see the most on the internet. They either downplay or deny slavery's role in the causation of the Civil War. Normally they'll cloak it with things like states' rights or Southern loyalty. And in fact, they'll go out of their way to lionize Southerners' loyalty. So they'll bring up tariffs and differences in general culture and economics as if all of those issues weren't underwritten by slavery. And when talking about the Civil War itself, they emphasize Northerner aggression. In fact, sometimes you'll hear them call the Civil War the War of Northern Aggression. You see, they portray the war as defending their homelands, who were simply trying to become their own country after the United States had somehow failed them. And then once the war was over, of course, then they have to reconstruct Reconstruction. So they portray Reconstruction as punitive, as though the Republicans were going out of their way to destroy the South and wreak havoc just to punish the South for even having attempted to secede. They'll especially deny the Civil Rights Acts and the various Reconstruction amendments, and then portray the US military, who were there to enforce the Civil Rights Acts, as a form of further punishment, even though the US military was never actually a substantial presence. So those are the general tenets of the Lost Cause myth. They emphasize the good of slavery for slaves, downplay or deny slavery's role, lionize Southerners' loyalty, say the Civil War was purely Northern aggression, and portray Reconstruction as punitive by denying civil rights legislation. You can see how the whole system kind of works together, and how it's built upon racism. But as with any mythology, there is a grain of truth to the lost cause. And going point by point, when they're saying slavery was good for slaves, what they're often complaining about is how slavery is portrayed in the media, where all slave owners are portrayed as being the absolute worst they possibly could be. Many portrayals clearly violate the slave codes that were the law at the time. Even in 1852, when Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, the South went into an uproar about how the novel was completely inaccurate to how slavery worked in the South. And in fact, the criticism was so strong that a year after publication, Stowe actually published a response called A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin. The reaction to her novel was so strong that when she met with Abraham Lincoln in 1862, Lincoln said, "So you are the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." So it is a delicate balancing act when portraying slavery, because obviously you don't want to go around saying that it was nice. But it's also easy to go too far in the other direction, and when they do that, they lend credence to the lost cause. A more recent example is the backlash against the 1619 Project. This is a bunch of journalists backed by the New York Times who are creating a school syllabus focused on the legacy of slavery as the sole driver of American history. Many historians have rightly denounced this obvious sensationalism, but that's just what journalists do. Understandably, such sensationalism fuels lost cause or retrenchment, since now they have proof of people using inaccuracies for political pandering. Engaging in the same sensationalism as Stowe allows lost causers to deny history, which becomes especially pronounced when they downplay or deny slavery's role in the Civil War. The grain of truth there is that the causes of the Civil War are super complicated. In fact, all wars are extremely complicated. That's why historians argue about what the causes were even to this day. But ultimately, slavery was at the root of the major causes of secession. In fact, the declarations of secession make that pretty clear, because they simply can't stop talking about how slavery is their way of life, and that it's threatened by Abraham Lincoln being elected. The Vice President of the Confederacy made it quite clear in what is called the Cornerstone Speech what role slavery took in Southern secession. He said, "The Confederacy's foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition."
No, it isn't.
This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. So while the causes are complicated, they almost always boil down to slavery in one way or another. In return for this obvious problem with their myth, lost causers tend to emphasize the loyalty of soldiers. You know, they say that's not why most Confederate soldiers were fighting. They fought out of loyalty to their state. But why a soldier fights doesn't change the casus belli. A casus belli, as in the cause of a war, is always complicated, and what the soldiers believe on the ground doesn't matter to that casus belli. Plus, you'll find that a lot of Confederate soldiers actually did believe they were fighting for slavery, and emphasized that in their journals, as in something that they were writing for themselves. So we can glean their motivations pretty well from that, and yeah, many of them actually were very much fighting for slavery. They saw that Lincoln's election might threaten that peculiar institution, as they called it, but in either case, it doesn't matter what the soldiers believe. Here's a fellow YouTuber who's actually spent a lot of time talking about this specific subject, making a bit about responding to comments, saying exactly this part of the myth.
Checkmate, Lincolnites! This perspective is so biased. Yes, slavery was in the mix, but South really complex. And not every Southern reb fought for slavery. Hell, even Confederate generals were against the practice. So do a big homeworks on it.
That's a lie. Most Confederate generals absolutely approved of slavery, and your average Confederate soldier knowingly fought to preserve it.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did.
I don't give a rat's ass about them rich Southern politicians whose aims were to preserve slavery. They should have been hanged. But the common soldier didn't give a shit about slaves or slavery. They were too poor.
Yeah, here's the thing, and I know you're not going to want to hear this, but they did give a shit. Multiple books have been written about this topic. Yeah, Confederate soldiers went to war for a variety of reasons. Were they defending their homes and families from invasion? Yes. But they also believed that preserving slavery was in the Confederacy's best interest.
His channel is called Atunchi Films, so be sure to go over and check out his channel. There's a whole lot of stuff like that, and it's pretty entertaining. Anyways, in terms of northern aggression, the grain of truth here is actually about perspective. So think about it this way. A rebellion is only a revolution when it's successful. We might call it the War of the Rebellion, but to a Southerner at the time, they'd argue that the Confederacy was a completely sovereign entity, even though it was not recognized by the Union. And therefore, any military action, whether peaceful or not, can be interpreted as aggression. That means maintaining forts, supplying those forts, and pretty much everything that happened at Sumter, they'd argue they were defending their homeland. That maintaining it as a Union fort was an act of aggression, which is their justification for shooting first, regardless of the fact that wouldn't be considered a just cause, even at the time. And then there's some further parts to that in the way that the war itself was conducted. For instance, there was the Anaconda Plan, in which the US blockaded itself. Now, according to international law at that point in time, and even today, a blockade can only be erected on a sovereign entity, at least if other countries are supposed to abide by that blockade. So in effect, the Anaconda Plan was a tacit admittance of Southern sovereignty. This really gets reinforced when the Union started using a total war strategy. With things like the destruction of Sherman's march, it becomes very easy to argue that the North is the aggressor. Of course, that forgets that people like the beloved Stonewall Jackson advocated total war strategy from the beginning of the war to attack the Union. He wanted to destroy his own hometown. And of course, all of this stuff about sovereignty and aggression completely misses the fact that sovereignty must be earned internationally. Anyone can claim to be a sovereign entity, but without the recognition of one's peers, that sovereignty doesn't truly exist. And the South completely failed in that regard. No major power recognized them as a sovereign entity. They certainly tried with Britain and France, but those negotiations went nowhere. So ultimately, they can argue that there was northern aggression, but the sovereignty of the Confederacy was never recognized. And finally, we get to Reconstruction. Now, they'll point out immediately that some congressmen really did want to punish the South, that they wanted to demote all southern states to being territories and make it incredibly difficult for them to be readmitted into the Union. Of course, looking at the declared motives of individuals denies the clear civil rights spirit of Reconstruction legislation. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were all Reconstruction amendments. The first Civil Rights Act in American history was because of Reconstruction. The second was because of Reconstruction. The Enforcement Acts, the Military Reconstruction Acts, all were designed to promote civil rights. Now they'll point to states' rights, where this is an actual argument that Reconstruction was about states' rights, as in the right to come back into the Union, and it had nothing to do with civil rights. And that was something that was being pushed by radical Republicans to cause some sort of retribution. They portray the violence of Reconstruction as retributive, and not that you've got Klansmen going around and terrorizing black people, but the other way around somehow. As in, the newly freed slaves were going to turn around and massacre white people, similarly to what happened in Haiti after their revolution. But here's the thing, no servile insurrection ever happened, so the fear of retributive violence simply is unfounded. So while there is a grain of truth, as with all myths like this, that grain of truth is a pretty small one, but it only takes a pebble to create a sand dune. Now, interestingly enough, the Lost Cause didn't just coalesce in a fully fledged ideology like it is today. As with any kind of abstraction, it has to be built over time. So right after the Civil War, many Southerners felt the need to explain why they seceded. In fact, one of these first books was called The Lost Cause in 1866 by Edward A. Pollard. 4 years later, when Robert E. Lee died, one of the eulogies written for him by Jubal Early practically defined what the Lost Cause would be. But by 1870, it wasn't that strong of an ideology. It would take another few decades for the Lost Cause to be widely accepted. But it became more and more accepted as Confederates started joining each other in reunions and writing memoirs. These guys emphasized their service and patriotism, and incidentally reinforced the Lost Cause as a consequence. The ex-president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, started doing
Sorry guys, my leg and foot are swollen to gubbed. I'm going to have to go and lie down. Thank you for joining me tonight, and I'll see you later. Go to who you wish.